Hey guys, imagine waking up one morning to find your mother-in-law has moved into your castle, her beady eyes judging your every move. And oh, by the way, your wife's head might be on the chopping block if she doesn't produce a son by next Tuesday. Welcome to the wild, wacky, and downright terrifying world of King Henry VIII and his 6 wives. Oh, and the 6 mothers-in-law who made his life a living Tudor hell. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a roller coaster through a royal soap opera where love, power, and survival get messier than a banquet hall after a drunken joust. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining in from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Buckle up, because part 1 of this saga is about to drag you through the muddy, treacherous courts of 16th century England, where marriage was a gamble, and mothers-in-law were the house that always won. Let's start with the first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and her formidable mother-in-law, Isabella of Castile, who probably could have stared down a dragon and made it apologize. Catherine was no wilting flower. She was a Spanish princess, raised in a court where her parents, Isabella and Ferdinand, were basically the power couple of the Renaissance. Think of them as the Brangelina of the 1490s, but with more armor and fewer paparazzi. Catherine was shipped off to England at 15 to marry Arthur, Henry's older brother, in a deal that was less about love and more about securing an alliance against France. Poor Arthur, a sickly lad who probably coughed his way through the wedding vows, didn't last long. He died within months, leaving Catherine a teenage widow in a foreign land, wondering if she'd be sent back to Spain like a faulty shipment of olives. Enter Henry, the strapping spare heir who was only 10 when Catherine first arrived. Fast forward a few years, and Henry's dad, Henry VII, is dead, the throne's up for grabs, and young Henry VIII, now 17 and built like a Renaissance quarterback, decides to marry Catherine. Why? Well, partly because she was gorgeous, devout, and had a dowry that could choke a horse, but mostly because her mother, Isabella, was the kind of woman who could make kings tremble from across the sea. Isabella wasn't just a queen, she was a warrior, a diplomat, and a devout Catholic who'd kicked the Moors out of Spain and bankrolled Columbus's little jaunt to the New World. Imagine getting a letter from her saying, "Take care of my daughter, or I'll sail over and personally rearrange your face." Henry wasn't about to test her, so in 1509, Henry and Catherine tie the knot, and for a while, it's all roses and royal banquets. Catherine's the perfect queen, pious, intelligent, and capable of running the country, while Henry's off jousting or writing love songs about himself. She even leads England to victory against the Scots in 1513, while Henry's busy losing battles in France. But here's the problem. Catherine's got one job in the eyes of the Tudor court: produce a male heir. And this is where the Tudor nightmare begins to creep in like damp rot in a castle wall. Catherine gets pregnant 6 times, but only one child survives infancy, a daughter, Mary, born in 1516. Henry's thrilled at first, but soon he's pacing the halls, muttering about how a girl can't possibly inherit his throne because, misogyny was the Tudor brand. Meanwhile, Isabella's ghost, or at least her influence, looms large. Even after her death in 1504, her shadow hangs over Catherine, who's been raised to believe duty to family and faith trumps everything. Catherine's not just fighting for her marriage, she's fighting for her mother's legacy, for Spain, for her daughter's future. Every miscarriage, every stillbirth, is a personal failure in her eyes, and you can bet she's praying harder than a monk during Lent, hoping to deliver the son Henry demands. But Henry's not patient. He's got a wandering eye and a temper that makes a thunderstorm look cuddly. By the 1520s, he's starting to think Catherine's womb is cursed, and who's he going to blame? Not himself, obviously. Kings don't do self-reflection. No, he's got his sights set on a new target, divine wrath. Maybe God's punishing him for marrying his brother's widow. Maybe the Pope made a mistake approving the marriage. Maybe it's time to ditch Catherine and find a new wife who can give him what he wants. Enter the mother-in-law factor. Isabella's not around anymore, but her legacy is a steel trap around Catherine. She's not just any princess. She's the daughter of the woman who unified Spain and scared half of Europe into submission. Catherine channels that energy, refusing to go quietly. When Henry starts muttering about annulment, she's not having it. She's like, Excuse me, I've been a perfect wife, I've given you a daughter, I've run your country while you were off playing knight, and now you want to trade me in like a used horse? Think again, buddy. Catherine's got the Pope on her side too, because her nephew, Charles V, is the Holy Roman Emperor and basically has the Vatican in his pocket. Henry's stuck, and he's not happy about it. The court's a pressure cooker, with Catherine holding her ground like a fortress under siege. Her ladies-in-waiting are whispering, the nobles are picking sides, and Henry's advisors are sweating buckets, trying to figure out how to get him out of this marriage without starting a war with Spain. And let's not forget the courtiers, who are basically Tudor reality TV stars, gossiping about whether Catherine's too old, too Spanish, or too stubborn. Spoiler alert, she's all three, and she's owning it. Now, let's talk about the real pain of survival in this era. Being queen wasn't all gowns and jewels. It was a high-stakes game where one wrong move could land you in a nunnery, or worse. Catherine's living in a world where medicine is basically drink this herbal sludge and pray. Childbirth is a death sentence half the time, and political alliances shift faster than a court jester's punchline. She's got to navigate Henry's mood swings, which range from "I love you, let's write poetry," to "I'm going to burn down the entire Catholic Church to get rid of you." And the food? Let's just say Tudor cuisine wasn't exactly Michelin star quality. Think boiled mutton and bread so hard you could use it as a weapon. Plus, the hygiene? Bathing was optional, and the court smelled like a mix of sweat, smoke, and despair. Catherine's not just surviving Henry, she's surviving an era where a cold could kill you and a bad harvest could starve half the kingdom. But, the real kicker? The mother-in-law dynamic. Isabella's influence is like a spectral hand guiding Catherine's every move. She's not just fighting for herself, she's fighting for the honor of her family, her country, and her faith. Every time Henry tries to push her aside, she's got Isabella's voice in her head saying, "You're a queen, act like it." And act like it she does. By the late 1520s, Henry's obsession with annulment is in full swing, and Catherine's digging in her heels. She's writing letters, rallying support, and reminding everyone that she's the daughter of a woman who conquered kingdoms. The court's a circus, with Henry's advisors scrambling to keep up, and the common folk are starting to whisper about the great matter. Henry's quest to ditch his wife. It's a soap opera, a tragedy, and a political thriller all rolled into one, and Catherine's at the center, holding her ground like a Tudor Joan of Arc. But Henry's not one to give up easily. He's got a new lady in his sights. Anne Boleyn, a sharp-tongued, dark-eyed firecracker who's about to turn the Tudor court upside down. And with Anne comes a whole new mother-in-law nightmare, Elizabeth Boleyn, a woman who's less warrior queen and more scheming social climber. As Catherine's world starts to crumble, Anne's rising like a phoenix from the ashes of Henry's patience, and the stage is set for a showdown that'll make Game of Thrones look like a picnic. So, what happens next? Will Catherine hold her ground? Will Henry get his way? And how does a king juggle two women, one mother-in-law's legacy, and a kingdom that's starting to smell rebellion? Stay tuned for part 2, where we dive into the chaos of Anne Boleyn, her meddling mom, and the Tudor court's descent into absolute madness. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. This story's only getting messier. Picture this. You're King Henry VIII, and your life's a juggling act of wives, wars, and a court full of backstabbing nobles who'd sell their own kids for a fancy hat. You've just spent years trying to ditch your first wife, Catherine of Aragon, only to realize her mother-in-law's legacy is like a ghost that won't stop haunting your castle. Now, enter Anne Boleyn, the woman who's about to set the Tudor court on fire with her wit, her charm, and a mother-in-law who's got ambition sharper than a guillotine. Welcome back to the chaotic, absurd, and downright brutal world of Henry VIII's 6 wives and the mothers-in-law who made his life a Renaissance nightmare. This is part 2, and trust me, the stakes are higher, the drama's thicker, and the beheadings are just warming up. Let's dive into Anne Boleyn and her mother, Elizabeth Boleyn, a woman who probably invented the phrase, "climb the social ladder or die trying." Anne's not your typical Tudor wallflower. She's got a sharp tongue, a sharper mind, and a knack for making men trip over their own egos. Raised partly in the French court, she's got that continental flair. Think less demure English rose and more sassy Parisian influencer with a vendetta. By the mid-1520s, she's back in England, catching Henry's eye like a spark in a haystack. Henry's still married to Catherine, but he's bored, frustrated, and obsessed with getting a male heir. Anne, with her dark eyes and refusal to be just another mistress, is like a shiny new toy he can't resist. But here's the catch. Anne's not playing by the old rules. She's not content to be Henry's side piece like her sister Mary was. Oh yeah, Mary Boleyn was Henry's mistress first, which makes this whole thing feel like a twisted Tudor reality show. Keeping Up with the Boleyns, anyone? Anne's like, if you want me, you're putting a ring on it, and I'm not talking about a promise ring. Enter Elizabeth Boleyn, Anne's mother and the ultimate stage mom of the 16th century. Elizabeth's not royalty like Isabella of Castile. She's a Norfolk girl who married up into the Boleyn family, and she's got a nose for opportunity like a bloodhound in a butcher shop. The Boleyns aren't old money, they're new money, scrappy and desperate to prove they belong in the big leagues. Elizabeth's the mastermind behind the family's rise, pushing her kids into the royal court like a Tudor Kris Jenner. She's got her daughter Mary warming Henry's bed for a while, but when that fizzles out, she pivots to Anne, her secret weapon. Elizabeth's probably whispering in Anne's ear, "Don't just flirt with the king, darling. Make him burn down the world for you." And burn it down he does. Henry's so smitten with Anne that he's ready to tear apart his marriage, his church, and half of Europe to have her. By 1527, he's knee-deep in the great matter, his quest to annul his marriage to Catherine. The Pope's not budging, Catherine's not budging, and Henry's patience is thinner than a peasant's porridge. Anne, meanwhile, is playing the long game. She's not giving Henry what he wants, not yet. She's holding out, keeping him on a leash made of love letters and promises of a son. Those letters, by the way, are peak Henry. Half poetic, half unhinged, like a lovesick teenager who also happens to have an executioner on speed dial. Anne's got him wrapped around her finger, but it's not all smooth sailing. The court's a snake pit, and everyone's got an opinion. Catherine's supporters call Anne a homewrecker, the nobles call her an upstart, and the common folk are just trying to figure out how to afford bread while the king's chasing skirts. Elizabeth Boleyn's in the background, orchestrating it all, making sure Anne's always one step ahead. She's probably slipping bribes to courtiers, charming diplomats, and reminding everyone that the Boleyns are the future. But let's talk about the survival game, because being Anne Boleyn in the 1520s is like playing chess on a board where the pieces can stab you. The court's a pressure cooker of gossip, betrayal, and power plays. You've got to dress better than everyone else, dance better than everyone else, and somehow avoid getting poisoned at dinner. Anne's got style. She's rocking French hoods instead of the frumpy gable hoods Catherine wears, and she's turning heads everywhere she goes. But style won't save you when the king's mood swings faster than a pendulum in a storm. Henry's still got one foot in his marriage to Catherine, and Anne's walking a tightrope between being his dream girl and not getting exiled, or worse. The Tudor era's no picnic either. Forget modern plumbing. Chamber pots are the height of luxury, and the court's so crowded you're practically sleeping on top of your enemies. Disease is everywhere. The sweating sickness can wipe out half your household in a week, and doctors are more likely to kill you than cure you. Anne's got to stay healthy, stay beautiful, and stay one step ahead of Catherine's spies, all while dodging her mother's constant "don't mess this up" glares. Elizabeth Boleyn's not just a mom, she's a manager, a PR team, and a drill sergeant rolled into one. She's probably waking Anne up at dawn with a checklist. Smile at the king, snub the French ambassador, and for God's sake, don't eat the fish. It's been sitting out since Tuesday. By 1533, Anne's gamble pays off. Henry's had enough of the Pope stalling, so he breaks with Rome, declares himself head of the Church of England, and gets his marriage to Catherine annulled. It's a seismic move. England's now a rogue state in Catholic Europe, and Henry's basically flipped the bird to the Pope, Spain, and anyone else who cares. Anne's crowned queen, pregnant with Henry's child, and for a hot second, it looks like the Boleyns have won the jackpot. Elizabeth's probably popping the 16th century equivalent of champagne, thinking her daughter's set for life. But here's the thing about Tudor jackpots. They come with a guillotine. Anne gives birth to a girl, Elizabeth, in September 1533. Henry's not thrilled. Another daughter? Really? He wanted a son, and Anne's starting to feel the heat. The court's whispering, the nobles are smirking, and Elizabeth Boleyn's probably sweating through her corset, wondering if her daughter's about to fumble the bag. Anne's pregnant again soon after, but the miscarriages start piling up, and Henry's eyes are wandering again. The same charm that won him over is now a liability. Anne's too bold, too opinionated, too French for the stuffy English court. And Elizabeth Boleyn? She's still in the game, trying to keep the family stock high, but it's like bailing out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. The courtiers are circling like vultures, and Anne's enemies, led by Catherine's loyalists, are ready to pounce. Survival in this world means constant vigilance. Anne's gotta watch her back, her front, and her sides, because betrayal's as common as fleas in a Tudor mattress. The food's still terrible. Think greasy stews and ale that tastes like regret. The air's thick with smoke and suspicion, and every banquet's a chance for someone to slip something nasty into your goblet. Anne's not just fighting for her crown, she's fighting for her life, and her mother's right there, pushing her to keep going. Elizabeth Boleyn's not a warm and fuzzy mom, she's a strategist, and Anne's her biggest asset. But the cracks are showing. By 1536, Anne's on her third pregnancy, and Henry's already eyeing Jane Seymour, a quiet, blonde noblewoman who's the opposite of Anne in every way. Jane's mother, Marjorie Seymour, is about to become the next mother-in-law in this cursed lineup, and she's got her own game plan. Anne's starting to realize that Henry's love is as stable as a three-legged stool, and the court's turning against her. Accusations of adultery, treason, and even witchcraft start swirling, and Elizabeth Boleyn's scrambling to save her daughter. But Henry's done playing. In May 1536, Anne's arrested, tried, and convicted on charges so flimsy they'd collapse under a stiff breeze. The real crime? Not giving Henry a son and being too much of a firebrand for a king who prefers his women docile. Anne's sent to the Tower of London, and Elizabeth Boleyn's world comes crashing down. Her daughter, her masterpiece, is about to lose her head, literally. On May 19th, 1536, Anne Boleyn walks to the scaffold, still sharp, still defiant, and faces the executioner with more grace than Henry ever deserved. The Boleyns are ruined, Elizabeth's dreams are dust, and Henry's already planning his next wedding. What's next? Jane Seymour's waiting in the wings, with her own mother-in-law baggage and a promise of the son Henry's been chasing. But the Tudor court's a meat grinder, and no one gets out unscathed. Stay tuned for part 3, where we meet Jane, her scheming mom, and a kingdom that's one bad decision away from chaos. This story's got more twists than a Tudor dance, and it's only getting bloodier. So, you thought the Tudor court couldn't get any wilder? Think again. We've just watched Anne Boleyn's head roll, her mother Elizabeth's dreams shatter, and Henry would dust himself off like he's just spilled some ale instead of, executing his wife. Welcome to part 3 of our dive into the unhinged, cutthroat saga of Henry VIII's 6 wives and the mothers-in-law who haunted his nightmares. This time, we're meeting Jane Seymour, the quiet blonde who somehow slipped through the chaos to become wife number 3, and her mother, Marjorie Seymour, a woman who played the game of Tudor survival with the subtlety of a chess grandmaster and the ruthlessness of a wolf. Buckle up, because this chapter's got triumph, tragedy, and a whole lot of Tudor absurdity, plus the usual stench of boiled mutton and betrayal. Jane Seymour's not like Catherine or Anne. She's not a fiery Spanish princess or a sharp-tongued French-educated vixen. No, Jane's the girl next door. If the girl next door lived in a castle and knew how to curtsy without breaking eye contact. She's demure, pale, and about as exciting as a bowl of Tudor porridge, which is exactly what Henry wants after Anne's drama. By 1536, Henry's pushing 45, his waistline's expanding faster than his ego, and he's desperate for a son to secure the Tudor dynasty. Jane's his fresh start, his blank slate, his maybe this one won't argue back fantasy. She's from a respectable but not overly flashy family, the Seymours, who've been climbing the social ladder without making too much noise. Enter Marjorie Seymour, Jane's mother and the latest mother-in-law, to make Henry's life a complicated mess. Marjorie's not a warrior queen like Isabella or a scheming socialite like Elizabeth Boleyn. She's a practical, no-nonsense noblewoman who's raised a brood of kids and knows how to keep her head down while plotting her family's rise. Think of her as the Tudor equivalent of that mom who always has a backup plan and a packed lunch ready. Marjorie's got a knack for reading the room, or in this case, the court. And she's drilled into Jane the art of being exactly what Henry needs, obedient, fertile, and boring enough to avoid trouble. Jane's been serving as Anne Boleyn's lady-in-waiting, watching the royal soap opera unfold like a front-row spectator at a gladiator fight. While Anne's fighting for her life, Jane's quietly catching Henry's eye, probably with a well-timed blush or a carefully worded compliment about his jousting skills. Marjorie's in the background, nudging Jane along like a stage director, making sure her daughter doesn't step on any landmines. The Seymours aren't as pushy as the Boleyns, but they're just as ambitious, and Marjorie's playing a long game. She knows Henry's tired of fiery women, so she's coaching Jane to be the opposite, soft-spoken, devout, and the human equivalent of a warm blanket. By the time Anne's head hits the scaffold in May 1536, Henry's already engaged to Jane. Talk about moving fast. Henry's giving modern dating apps a run for their money. They marry 10 days later, and Jane's suddenly queen, stepping into a role that's already claimed 2 women's lives. The court's buzzing, half expecting Jane to crash and burn like her predecessors, but Marjorie's made sure her daughter's prepared. Jane's got one job: give Henry a son. No pressure, right? Except the pressure's crushing, because being queen in Henry's court is like playing Russian roulette with 5 bullets loaded. Jane's got to navigate a world where every smile hides a dagger, every banquet's a potential poison trap, and Henry's mood swings could start a war or end a marriage. The Tudor court's still a cesspool of intrigue, where nobles are betting on who will be the next to fall and the servants are eavesdropping for scraps of gossip to sell. Jane's playing it safe, sticking to her meek and mild persona, but she's not stupid. She's seen what happens to queens who don't deliver, and she's got Marjorie's voice in her head, reminding her to keep Henry happy and the Seymours relevant. Let's talk about surviving in this hellscape. Tudor England's not exactly a wellness retreat. The air's thick with the smell of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and whatever's rotting in the moat. Medicine's a joke. Doctors are still bleeding people to cure fevers, and childbirth's a gamble where the odds are worse than a jousting match. Jane's got to stay healthy, pregnant, and in Henry's good graces, all while dodging the court's vipers. The food's no help. Think stale bread, greasy meat, and wine that's more vinegar than vintage. Hygiene's a luxury. Even the queen's washing with a cloth in a bucket, hoping she doesn't catch the plague from a stray flea. And the politics? It's a minefield. Jane's trying to restore Catherine's daughter, Mary, to favor without upsetting Henry, who's still touchy about his first marriage. Meanwhile, the Boleyns' fall has left a power vacuum, and every noble family's scrambling to fill it. Marjorie Seymour's working overtime, making sure the Seymours stay on top. She's not as flashy as Elizabeth Boleyn, but she's just as cunning, whispering advice to Jane and her brothers, who are now Henry's new best buddies. Jane's brothers, Edward and Thomas Seymour, are rising stars, and Marjorie's making sure they capitalize on their sister's position. It's a family affair, but unlike the Boleyns, the Seymours are playing it cool, avoiding the spotlight while stacking their chips. By October 1537, Jane's moment of truth arrives. She gives birth to a son, Edward, and Henry's over the moon, throwing parties like he's just won the Renaissance lottery. The court's celebrating, the church bells are ringing, and Marjorie's probably breathing a sigh of relief, thinking the Seymours are untouchable. Jane's done what Catherine and Anne couldn't, delivered a male heir. For a brief, shining moment, it looks like Jane's cracked the Tudor code. She's the perfect queen, the golden girl, the one who finally got it right. But here's the Tudor twist. Nothing good lasts. Just 12 days after Edward's birth, Jane's fighting for her life. Childbed fever, the silent killer of the 16th century, creeps in like a thief. Tudor doctors, with their leeches and prayers, are about as useful as a paper shield. Jane's slipping away, and there's nothing Marjorie or anyone else can do. On October 24th, 1537, Jane dies, leaving Henry a widower, Edward a motherless heir, and the Seymours teetering on the edge of glory and ruin. Henry's devastated, or at least as devastated as a guy like Henry can be. He declares Jane his true wife, probably because she gave him a son and didn't live long enough to annoy him. The court mourns, but let's be real. Half of them are already plotting who's next in line. Marjorie Seymour's left picking up the pieces, her daughter's death a brutal reminder that even victory in the Tudor court comes with a body count. The Seymours still have Edward, the golden boy, but without Jane, their grip on power is shakier than a drunk knight on a horse. Henry's not done, though. He's got a son, sure, but he's a paranoid wreck, convinced one heir isn't enough. The court's whispering about who's next, and Marjorie's watching her family's future hang by a thread. Henry's already eyeing his next bride. Enter Anne of Cleves, a German princess with a mother-in-law who's about to make Henry regret ever opening the marriage market. The court's a circus. The stakes are deadly, and the drama's only getting thicker. Stay tuned for part 4, where we dive into Anne of Cleves, her formidable mom, and a marriage that's more disaster than dynasty. This saga's got more twists than a Tudor knot garden, and trust me, it's about to get gloriously unhinged. Alright folks, we've reached the final act of this Tudor train wreck, and if you thought Henry VIII's life couldn't get more absurd, buckle up for a wild ride. We've seen Catherine of Aragon fight like a lioness, Anne Boleyn burn too bright, and Jane Seymour deliver a son only to exit stage left in the most tragic way. Now, in part 4, we're diving into the chaotic mess of Henry's final 3 wives, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr, and the mothers-in-law who kept the king's blood pressure higher than a jousting tournament gone wrong. This is a tale of diplomatic disasters, teenage scandals, and one woman who outsmarted the Tudor meat grinder, all while dodging the stench of betrayal and bad hygiene. Let's start with Anne of Cleves, the German princess who became wife number 4, and proved that sometimes even a king can't swipe right without regret. By 1539, Henry's a widower, a father, and a walking midlife crisis. He's got his son, Edward, but he's paranoid about the Tudor line and desperate for a spare heir. Plus, England's isolated after breaking with Rome, so Henry's advisors are pushing for a foreign alliance. Enter Anne of Cleves, a 24-year-old from a small German duchy, picked more for politics than passion. Her mother, Maria of Jülichburg, is the mother-in-law who's about to make Henry's life a diplomatic nightmare. Maria's not a glamorous queen like Isabella or a scheming climber like Elizabeth Boleyn. She's a practical, devout noblewoman who's raised Anne to be modest, dutiful, and about as exciting as a Lutheran hymn. Anne's not a beauty by Tudor standards. Her portrait by Hans Holbein was basically the 16th century equivalent of a heavily filtered dating profile pic. Henry sold on the idea of her, though, thanks to his advisor Thomas Cromwell, who's hyping her up like she's the answer to all of England's problems. Maria's probably thrilled, thinking her daughter's about to secure a dynasty and maybe get some decent English wool for the family business. But when Anne arrives in England in January 1540, it's a disaster from the jump. Henry, expecting a Renaissance supermodel, meets Anne and famously calls her a Flanders mare. Rude, Henry, rude. She's tall, plain, and doesn't speak much English, which doesn't help when your husband's expecting flirty banter. The wedding happens anyway, because geopolitics wait for no one, but Henry's sulking like a toddler who got socks for Christmas. Maria's influence is all over Anne. Her stiff manners, her heavy German gowns, her insistence on card games instead of dancing. It's like she's been raised to survive a nunnery, not a royal court. Henry can't stand her, and the marriage is a non-starter. He claims it's never consummated, which is Tudor code for I'm not into it, and I'm blaming her. The court's a mess, with nobles snickering and Cromwell sweating bullets, knowing his head's on. The line for this matchmaking flop, Anne, bless her, is just trying to survive a world where the king's disappointment could mean exile or worse. Tudor life's still a nightmare. Think drafty castles, chamber pots, and food that's either undercooked or suspiciously green. Anne's gotta navigate this while learning English on the fly and dodging Henry's tantrums. Maria's not there to hold her hand, but her upbringing's got Anne keeping calm and carrying on, even as Henry plots to ditch her. By July 1540, Henry's had enough. He annuls the marriage, citing some flimsy technicality about a pre-contract from Anne's childhood. Surprisingly, Anne doesn't fight it. Maybe it's Maria's pragmatism shining through, or maybe Anne's just relieved to escape Henry's wandering hands. She gets a generous settlement, a couple of manors, and the title of King's Sister, which is honestly the best deal any of Henry's wives ever got. Maria's probably breathing a sigh of relief back in Germany, glad her daughter's alive and not headless. Anne of Cleves, the ultimate survivor, settles into a comfy life in England, outliving Henry and most of his court. Take that, Tudor drama. But Henry's not done. He's barely out of his annulment paperwork when he sets his sights on wife number 5, Catherine Howard, a teenage firecracker who's about to make Anne Boleyn look like a nun. Catherine's barely 17, a cousin of Anne Boleyn and a total wild card. Her mother, Jocasta Culpeper, is long dead, but her step-grandmother, Agnes Howard, Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, steps in as the mother-in-law figure, and she's a hot mess of negligence and ambition. Agnes is less a guiding hand and more a distracted babysitter who let Catherine run wild in a household full of horny young courtiers. By the time Catherine catches Henry's eye in 1540, she's a flirty, fun-loving teenager who's got no business being queen, but looks great in a low-cut gown. Henry, now 49, overweight and nursing a festering leg wound that smells like regret, is smitten. It's like watching your creepy uncle fall for a TikTok star. Catherine's young, vivacious, and has zero political savvy, which makes her a breath of fresh air for Henry, but a walking disaster for everyone else. Agnes Howard's supposed to be keeping an eye on her, but she's too busy managing the Howard family's power plays to notice Catherine's got a past shadier than a London alley. See, Catherine's been educated in Agnes's household, which was basically a Tudor frat house. Late-night parties, secret rendezvous, and enough scandal to fill a tabloid. She's had flings with at least 2 guys, including a musician named Henry Mannix and a secretary named Frances Derham, who she might have been semi-engaged to. Agnes either didn't know or didn't care, and now Catherine's queen, married to Henry in July 1540, just weeks after the Anne of Cleves debacle. The court's buzzing, half in love with Catherine's youthful energy, half betting on how long she'll last. Spoiler, not long. Catherine's got no idea how to play the queen game. She's throwing parties, flirting with courtiers, and allegedly sneaking around with Thomas Culpeper, a dashing gentleman of Henry's privy chamber. Agnes Howard's nowhere to be found, probably counting her family's titles while Catherine's digging her own grave. The Tudor court's a pressure cooker, spies everywhere, gossip spreading faster than the plague, and Henry's temper ready to explode. Catherine's not just risking her own neck, she's dragging the whole Howard family down with her. By 1541, the rumors hit critical mass. Henry's advisors, smelling blood, dig into Catherine's past and uncover her premarital escapades. Henry's devastated, not because he loves her, but because his ego's bruised. He thought he'd found a pure, adoring young wife, but turns out she's got more baggage than a merchant's cart. In February 1542, Catherine's arrested, tried, and beheaded, along with Culpeper and Derham. Agnes Howard's hauled in for questioning, narrowly escapes the axe, and the Howard's reputation takes a nosedive. It's a brutal reminder that in Tudor England, a mother-in-law's neglect can be as deadly as a scheming plot. Henry's reeling, but he's not out. Enter wife number 6, Catherine Parr, the one who finally outsmarted the Tudor game. At 31, she's a twice-widowed noblewoman with brains, charm, and a survival instinct sharper than a headsman's blade. Her mother, Maud Green, is dead, but her influence lingers. Maud raised Catherine to be educated, poised, and diplomatic, the kind of woman who could talk her way out of a lion's den. Catherine Parr marries Henry in 1543, stepping into a court that's seen 5 queens come and go, 3 of them dead. Henry's a wreck, obese, sick, and paranoid, with a leg ulcer that could knock out a horse. Catherine's not in it for love. She's here to survive and maybe do some good. Maud's lessons are her superpower. Stay calm, stay useful, and never let Henry see you sweat. Catherine's a master at this. She nurses Henry's wounds, grows, plays stepmom to his kids, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward, and even publishes books, which is basically unheard of for a Tudor queen. She's pushing for religious reform, which is risky because Henry's flip-flopping between Catholic and Protestant like he's choosing dinner courses. The court's still a snake pit, with factions trying to trip her up. Catherine nearly gets arrested in 1546 when her enemies accuse her of heresy, but she talks her way out of it, charming Henry with a mix of wit and groveling. Maud's ghost must be cheering because Catherine's playing the game like a pro. Survival in Tudor England's still brutal. Disease, bad food, and the constant threat of Henry's temper keep everyone on edge. Catherine's dodging all of it, keeping her head, literally, and outliving Henry, who dies in January 1547. She remarries only to die in childbirth a year later, proving the Tudor curse spares no one. And that's the end of our saga. 6 wives, 6 mothers-in-law, and a king who turned marriage into a blood sport. From Isabella's iron will to Maud's quiet wisdom, these women shaped their daughters' fates for better or worse. The Tudor court was a circus of ambition, betrayal, and survival, and somehow these queens and their moms kept the show going. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. Hope you're ready to rewatch, because this story's as addictive as a Tudor soap opera. Imagine waking up every dawn to the sound of 50 rustling silks and 50 discontented sighs, only to realize that this is your 6th wife demanding breakfast. and your 99th plotting your demise by poisoned pomegranate juice. Welcome to the gilded nightmare of Egypt's most prolific polygamist, where matrimonial bliss means a daily test of cunning survival skills. He believed wives were like landscape features, each new face adding another pyramid on the horizon of his ego. Yet what followed was less architectural marvel and more architectural mayhem. One morning, he stood on his balcony overlooking the Nile, squinting at a flotilla of ornate barges approaching the palace, each carrying a new bride destined to complicate his already labyrinthine marital roster. His viziers exchanged glances. Should they build another wing for unit quarters, or perhaps commission a new poison antidote factory? The harem corridors were a carnival of whispered alliances and silent betrayals. Wife number 12, a Nubian dancer with a flair for midnight conspiracies, taught wife number 11 how to eavesdrop through the alabaster walls by humming lullabies that dislodged a hidden pebble. Soon, every wife had her own secret tunnel or coded pigeon post. The pharaoh's precious ear was never free from whispers of sweet flattery or vicious rumor. Breakfast was a spectacle that could rival any chariot race. The royal cooks raced against time to prepare delectable fowl and honeyed figs, aware that the first morsel served to wife number 43 would set off a chain reaction of envy and sabotage. If wife 43 detected that wife 52's platter glistened with fresher figs, diplomatic tensions rose faster than the morning sun. A single misplacement of a pomegranate half could ignite a culinary war, with tears and accusations flying like arrows in the sky. The pharaoh, caught between hunger and hysteria, attempted to impose order. He decreed that all wives must dine in strict alphabetical order, until Cleopatra, whose name came first only in his heart, loudly contested. Soon, Cleopatra the First, Cleopatra the Second, Cleopatra the Third, dozens more Cleopatras joined the fray. Strategic alphabetical upheaval was his only answer. Decree wife names renamed to animals: tiger wife, hippo wife, snake wife. But then the beasts themselves joined mother-in-law alliances. Council sessions became rent-seeking endeavors. The harem's self-appointed queen mother, wife number 1, appointed because she was first to arrive, not due to talent, insisted on a cabinet of taste testers to vet all court petitions. Her criteria? The petition must smell pleasing, taste like honeyed wisdom, and leave no skull-chilling aftertaste. No grain tax could pass without her approval, which meant the pharaoh spent more time negotiating grain allocations than expanding his empire. By mid-morning, the pharaoh's schedule resembled a particularly complex game of Senet with loaded dice. He wanted to commission a new temple. Wife 73 demanded a silk-lined library. Wife 24 insisted on a ceremonial garden for her pet geese. The architects, trapped between herds of royal carpenters and surging ambition, began building columns that led nowhere. 5 standalone pillars in the desert, monuments to bureaucratic absurdity. Then came afternoon negotiations, where each wife peddled her favored candidate for chief cupbearer, grand scribe, or military commander. Each candidate carried bribes in the form of fragrant oils, decorative anklets, or veiled threats scribbled on papyrus. Generals found themselves as pawns, deployed on border skirmishes just so one wife could showcase her influence. Meanwhile, frontier tribes grew perplexed by the sudden influx of soldiers, led by a man whose priorities seemed more about winning domestic votes than foreign conquests. Even the godly rituals were not spared. The high priest complained that the goddess Hathor was receiving too many floral offerings. Each wife demanded exclusive devotion for her personal deity. Soon, statues of Sekhmet, Isis, and Bastet were stacked in the temple courtyard, like rival football team mascots. Daily, the pharaoh had to shuffle incense burners between altars, inciting divine quarrels as the gods themselves seemed to vie for his attention. Twilight offered no respite. The moonlit courtyard became a stage for poetic recitals and poetic backstabbings. Wives recited odes in praise of the pharaoh's virility, performance punctuated by pointed lines about neglected carpets or ill-fitted sandals. Each recitation aimed to outshine the last, but often ended in improvisational insults, leaving the audience torn between applause and panic. Security guards patrolled the shadows, prepared to intervene should the rhythmic clashing of silver anklets evolve into full-fledged catfight. When night fully descended, the pharaoh, exhausted, tallied up the day's damages. one broken amphora, 3 girlfriends conspiring to replace him, and a newly drafted edict banning wives from owning pet snakes, a failed attempt to curb the number of venomous gifts left at rival doorsteps. He wondered if he'd ever master the art of monogamy, or at least monolithic statutes that his wives could follow. Yet, despite the chaos, there were fleeting moments of tenderness. He once caught wife 57 humming a lullaby to his heir, a gentle melody that reminded him why he endured the pandemonium. He realized that his empire's greatest strength lay not in stone walls or chariot fleets, but in the living, breathing women who wielded power in silken robes. They were his greatest challenge and his greatest achievement. And so, as dawn approached once more, the Pharaoh prepared for another round, another breathless breakfast, another council of beguiling petitions, another night of amphitheater dramas. He stood at the palace gates, staring out at the river's endless flow, and whispered, "Let the games begin again." Because in this kingdom of 100 wives, survival was not just a matter of birthright. It was a daily deadline in a satirical saga, where love, power, and sheer endurance intertwined in the absurd tapestry of history. The sun had barely crested the eastern horizon when an urgent trumpet blast shattered the fragile peace of the palace courtyard. Pharaoh scratched his chin. He'd barely recovered from yesterday's tragedy. Wife number 47 had accidentally set fire to her boudoir, trying to roast dates over an open brazier. And already another crisis demanded his fragile attention. A royal messenger, quivering beneath the weight of several rolled-up decrees, stumbled forward. "Your Majesty," he panted, "the vizier requests your presence in the Hall of Endless Quills. He's discovered that wife number 83 has declared herself high scribe over all official correspondence." Pharaoh groaned. He'd known that appointing a harem-wide vote on administrative titles had been a bad idea. Mob democracy in a palace crowded with ambitious women was akin to plotting one's own undoing. But he'd been desperate to appease the factions. Now, a mustachioed Nubian beauty had seized control of every seal and stylus in Egypt, sealing all diplomatic letters with her personal monogram, a cunning silhouette of herself atop a pyramid. Striding through marbled corridors, Pharaoh surveyed the courtly chaos. Servants darted like startled scarabs, eunuchs scuttled in pairs behind every palace door, eyes darting. Every pillar was plastered with papyrus notices, proclamation by snake wife, all official pigeons must wear silk leg ribbons. Edict from hippo wife, river water shall be dyed rose gold before entering the palace. Decree of vulture wife. All mourners in state funerals must speak only in inverted compliments. The hall smelled of ink, incense, and simmering tension. In the Hall of Endless Quills, Vizier Merimptah glared at the stacks of unopened letters. "My lord," he said, voice trembling, "we have 25 urgent war dispatches, 18 grain tax petitions, and 3 marriage proposals from neighboring kings, yet every document bears the seal of Khnumemhat III. He pointed to the proud signature, an elegant K3 crowned with a stylized scarab. "She now decides what reaches your desk. The Hittites have waited 2 days for our reply." Pharaoh pinched the bridge of his nose. He could almost smell the encroaching threat of war. Or was that just the saffron boiling over in the kitchens? Either way, he addressed the assembly. "Ladies, I appreciate your enthusiasm for governance, but I cannot wage war with jam-packed quills or attempt diplomacy through a hyperactive pigeon network." He paused, scanning their expectant faces. "Khnumemhat, would you kindly release the seals and return the quills?" Khnumemhat III, wife 83, clad in robes of midnight blue linen, curtsied with the grace of a trained dancer. "My beloved, I fear your administrative machinery has been inefficient, but if you wish, I shall relinquish the seals, provided you publicly commend my superior ink economy." She brandished a gilded stylus like a rapier. Pharaoh weighed his options. Public praise would embolden the scribal faction. Refusing would risk a palace coup by calligraphy. At length he sighed. "Very well. In tomorrow's ceremony at Karnak, I shall praise Khnumemhat's unparalleled devotion to efficient record-keeping." He felt the room shift, victory, but hollow. As the quills were returned, a sudden commotion arose at the doorway. The royal falconers burst in, clutching a chained vulture whose beak was encased in crimson leather. "Majesty," the chief falconer gasped, Wife number 99 has taken to feeding your sacred vultures exotic delicacies, figs soaked in fermented date wine. Now they refuse to hunt, preferring to circle the palace and hoot drunkenly at the guards. Pharaoh sighed. Let them hoot. At least their drunken stupor will deter any would-be assassins. The falconers exchanged looks. They knew better than to complain further. At midday, Pharaoh retreated to the rose garden for an informal council. He'd hoped the scent of blossoms might quell the palace's mounting hysteria. Instead, he found himself surrounded by a posse of wives representing every faction: the Python Sisterhood, the Catwalk Coalition, the Papyrus Princess League, and a fringe group known as the Free-Range Geese Enthusiasts, who insisted on daily honks between legislative sessions. Each faction advanced its own agenda. The Python Sisterhood demanded that the royal wardrobe switch entirely to green-dotted fabrics. The Catwalk Coalition argued for weekly strut parades in the courtyard. The Papyrus Princesses lobbied for exclusive rights to commission public monuments, and the Geese Enthusiasts protested that their honks were essential for palace sanitation. They claimed geese scared away vermin more effectively than cats. The debate grew so heated that Venetian blinds trembled in disquiet. Pharaoh realized he had promised a vote of confidence to each group. He drilled down, "What will each of you sacrifice to ensure the stability of the realm?" Silence. Then the Papyrus Princesses volunteered to retire from public protests on the condition that a new temple of writing be built in their honor. The Python Sisterhood agreed to suspend fabric demands if given honorary custody of all royal cobras. The Catwalk Coalition would close the parade if they could be appointed official ballerinas to the foreign dignitaries, and the Geese Enthusiasts requested nightly moonlit goose choir performances. Pharaoh blinked. Diplomatic collapse, thespian overload, serpentine risk, and symphonic geese. He had no good answers, yet he nodded solemnly. Your sacrifices are noted. By late afternoon, the palace gates rattled as a caravan of ambassadors arrived from Nubia, bearing gifts, ivory tusks, gold rings, and a delegation of their most persuasive dancers. Pharaoh greeted them graciously, though his smile felt as taut as a harp string. He had authorized the vizier to reply to their invitation 2 days ago. Inside the grand audience chamber, wife number 14, head of the culinary council, intercepted the envoy's tray. She re-seasoned their salted fish with royal pepper blend, then sent them on to meet Pharaoh. The ambassadors waited, half-starved, while she lingered to taste-test new honey-roasted quail. The delay only deepened their suspicion that Egypt was indecisive, bordering on comical. When Pharaoh finally convened the meeting, he bowed deeply. "Honored guests, forgive our tardiness. We have been otherwise engaged ensuring domestic harmony." He gestured to his entourage of wives, each curtsying or nodding like a synchronized glitch in a royal automaton. The ambassadors exchanged alarmed glances. "My dear," whispered one envoy to his companion, "I believe we've stepped into a theater of the absurd." Pharaoh launched into diplomatic niceties, but his mind drifted back to the palace, to the cook who refused to prepare his supper until she'd been declared supreme food taster, to the architect who presented blueprints for a slipper pavilion where each wife could display her footwear, and to the twitching face of wife number 62, who was rumored to be developing her own network of subterranean tunnels beneath the throne room. By evening, Pharaoh slipped away to the small private apartments he reserved for moments of genuine solitude. There, in a modest chamber lined with simple linens, no eunuch interruption, no wife vying for attention, he sank onto a wooden stool and exhaled. Outside, the palace shimmered with torchlight and silken rustle, a living mosaic of ambition and resentment. He reflected on the day's absurdities. He had nearly declared war on the Hittites by accident, frustrated the Nubian ambassadors, and agreed to patronize goose choirs. He was both monarch and ringmaster in a court that had become a carnival of vanity. Each wife was a universe unto herself, a poet, a bureaucrat, a warrior queen, a gourmet. Together they formed a fractious constellation that defied any mortal's capacity to govern with authority. Yet they were his lifeblood, his legacy. As the moon full and bright rose above the desert sands, Pharaoh rose from his stool. He donned a simple linen tunic, devoid of jewels or embroidery, an ironic tribute to his longing for simplicity. He stepped into the courtyard, where the geese honked their nightly melody, the cats lounged atop marble benches, and distant music drifted from an impromptu lute recital in the women's quarters. It was chaos, yes, but it was also life in its most exuberant, unpredictable form. He whispered to the night air, "Let them scheme through the dark. Tomorrow I will parry their petitions with equal cunning." He thought of spearheading a grand new canal, of restoring an ancient temple, of writing his own edicts, far from silk ribbons and poisoned pomegranates. But deep down, he knew the harem would always pull him back into its velvet-clad vortex, and perhaps that was as it should be. An empire ruled not by a solitary crown, but by a chorus of 100 voices, each desperate to be heard, each dancing at the edge of power. With that, Pharaoh strode into the shadows, ready to rise at dawn and face the absurd theater of his own creation once more. Because in Egypt's greatest saga, one of pyramids and pantheons, of conquests and curses, the most enduring legend was the man who dared to love 100 wives, and survived to tell the tale. The first light of dawn found Pharaoh once more entrenched in the endless war of hissed demands and silk-draped intrigue. The courtyard lanterns still smoldered, their smoky breath mingling with the scent of jasmine from the night's offerings. Before him lay a fresh stack of petition scrolls, 117 new grievances, suggestions, and love letters. Each bore the seal of a different wife, each promising the fate of the kingdom hinged on her request. Wife number 15, renowned for her mastery of ornamental embroidery, insisted on a personal workshop beneath the east wing, claiming the early sunlight there would inspire her to stitch motifs worthy of Aten himself. Wife 28 demanded a bronze statue honoring her subtle elbow technique at feasts. Wife 69 proposed a nightly symposium on the magic of moonlight reflections in polished bronze shields. Wife 13, a notorious name change enthusiast, had renamed herself Sapphire Lotus of the Morning Breeze, and thus required her own throne, upholstered in saffron-colored velvet. Pharaoh wept inwardly. He summoned Vizier Meremptah, bleary-eyed and clutching an alabaster cup of spiced wine. "My lord," the vizier lamented, "if we comply with every request, we shall build an entire city of workshops, temples, and salons before the year's end. Our granaries will echo with emptiness, our soldiers will drift away in search of food, and our coffers will sing the song of the lost." "Then choose," Pharaoh sighed, draining his cup. "Choose which wives to appease and which to postpone indefinitely." The vizier's brows knit together. "That requires a council vote." "Council vote?" Pharaoh spat. "I have lived through terror-stricken votes on stylus distribution and silkworm breeding schedules. I will decide." So he chose, with the precision of a crocodile stalking prey, 5 petitions to grant, 15 to adjourn, and the remainder to archive in the labyrinthine royal library, where they would gather dust next to the scrolls on proper etiquette for royal vultures. No sooner had the edicts been drafted than an urgent trumpet blast summoned him to the grand pavilion. There, beneath fluttering banners, stood Wife 97, draped in argent robes and wielding a crystal chalice. A hush fell. Even the temple cats ceased their prowling to watch. "My beloved Pharaoh," she declared, voice echoing over the silent throng, "I propose a festival of the roses, 3 days and 3 nights of perfumed dances, rose-petal confetti, and nightly release of doves dyed vermilion. The people will rejoice. Your name shall be sung in every market and valley." Wife 46, whose official title was Chief Conservator of Ceremonial Flames, turned to Pharaoh with narrowed eyes. "Our treasury is nearly depleted lighting the eternal torches. Shall we burn fields to provide rose petals, or import from Phoenicia at exorbitant rates?" Wife 24, protector of the palace geese, piped up, "If I must choose between burning fields or feeding doves, I vote fields. The geese prefer barley over petals." Pandemonium erupted. The Pharaoh raised his hand, but no one paused. He cleared his throat. "Enough!" Silence fell. "We shall defer the festival of roses until after the harvest. Meanwhile, I decree that the gardens are to cultivate wild poppies, which require less water and fewer workers." A collective groan rippled through the pavilion, but to his surprise, Wife 97 curtsied gracefully. "As you wish, my sovereign," she said. "I shall compose new dances, no roses required." Relief flickered in Pharaoh's chest. Perhaps a haven of compromise remained, yet the respite was fleeting. As he retreated to his private quarters, a phalanx of eunuchs bore in the day's final catastrophe. Wife 58 had summoned her personal astrologer to calculate the kingdom's fortune. The astrologer, eyes bleary from late-night stargazing, predicted famine within 3 moons, plague within 5, and civil revolt by year's end. He offered elaborate remedies, sacrifices of exotic peacocks, nightly vigils under specific constellations, and a recalibration of the palace sundial. "Tell her," Pharaoh moaned to Vizier Meremptah, "that the only star I worship is the rising sun that brings new petitions." Meremptah bowed and departed. Left alone, Pharaoh stared at the polished obsidian mirror. He tried to recall his original ambitions: grand canals, monumental obelisks, peace treaties with the Hittites. Instead, he found himself entangled in the gossamer webs of 100 wives, each thread tugging at his attention, each knot threatening to strangle his resolve. He lay down on his bed of woven reeds, sleep fleeting behind closed eyelids. He dreamed of a desert without palaces, of a single companion to share the quiet. He awoke to a fevered whisper: "Long live the Pharaoh! Long live the Pharaoh! Long live the Pharaoh!" It was the chorus of his wives circulating through the corridors like a haunting hymn. Morning arrived with renewed vigor. The palace gates flung open to admit emissaries from Kush, laden with ebony carvings and copious flattery. Their ambassador, draped in crimson silk, bowed low before Pharaoh, only to be waylaid by wife 32, who insisted that her tribute tent be built within the reception hall. The ambassadors waited in the courtyard, sipping lukewarm tea, while she auditioned 3 tent designs and vetoed each for insufficient ventilation. Pharaoh forced a diplomatic smile. "Honored guests, forgive our architectural enthusiasm." He waved his hand toward 3 visionless blue canvases, on which sketches of draping could barely be discerned. "That matter will be resolved anon." Inside, the harem faction sharpened their alliances. The Catwalk Coalition conspired with the Papyrus Princess League to propose that every ambassador parade through the fashion promenade, an elongated corridor lined with mirrors and lit by braziers. The Python Sisterhood threatened to release 100 cobras into the entourage if their pet serpents were not allowed to accompany them. The geese enthusiasts bargained goose choruses in exchange for pond expansion. Pharaoh, cornered, made a decision born of desperation. He proclaimed an ambassadorial extravaganza, a single event combining dance, fashion, oratory, and wildlife showcase. The ambassadors, bewildered but polite, agreed. Thus was born the first and only royal variety hodgepodge, where Kushite dancers performed beneath archways of rose poppies, geese honked in harmony, cobras slithered through glass-encased tunnels, and poets recited verses praising Pharaoh's tolerance of absurdity. The spectacle, though logistically nightmarish, was a triumph of chaotic diplomacy. The ambassadors departed with boundless gifts and assurances of renewed trade. Pharaoh allowed himself a brief, victorious smile, but triumph in his court was ephemeral. No sooner had the Kushite caravans vanished beyond the horizon than turmoil returned. Wife 80, the kingdom's designated heir-apparent whisperer, stormed into the council chamber. She claimed that heir Prince Amenhotep had been sulking, refusing to learn chariot warfare unless he was granted daily lessons in royal etiquette from his mother, wife number 2. Wife 2, affronted by this insinuation, demanded public confirmation of her maternal supremacy, or she would refuse to attend any future state banquets, throwing the palace's official ceremonies into disarray. Pharaoh groaned. He dreaded a public spat between the queen mother and the heir's tutor. It would embolden scribes to record every insult in infamous detail. He summoned both women and made an unprecedented offer, a joint mentorship program in which they would alternate teaching duties and co-author a manual on proper royal decorum. The dueling matriarchs blinked, processed this unprecedented collaboration, and then, surprisingly, agreed. It was a moment of unity so rare that even the palace statues seemed to lean forward in astonishment. Yet unity proved as fleeting as a desert mirage. At dusk, in the frescoed banquet hall, seconds before the evening feast, wife 95 collapsed in theatrical protest. She decried the lack of her personal incense variety, sandalwood mist with a hint of myrrh, and accused the chief perfumer of incompetence bordering on treason. Merenptah attempted to placate her with a hastily mixed blend of crushed almonds and lotus petals, but she refused to proceed without a golden censer. The feast was delayed by 2 hours, as craftsmen carved a censer in the desired shape, an elephant trampling a cobra, before wife 95 conceded to dine. By the time the banquet concluded, the bakers were exhausted, the amphorae half empty, and the pharaoh's patience wholly evaporated. He rose from the head of the table, voice ringing through the hall. "Ladies, I commend your dedication to detail, but I regret to inform you that I have sold tomorrow's rations to fund the elephant cobra censer. We shall have only water and stale bread until next week." Silence. Heads drooped. Then a single clap echoed, wife 95's in ironic salute. One by one, the wives burst into laughter, their relief palpable. In that moment, the absurdity of their extravagances crystallized, a censer over rations, feathered fans over fields of grain. Pharaoh allowed himself a grin. For a brief, shining instant, the harem stood united not by petitions or rivalries, but by the shared ludicrousness of their extravagances. He raised his goblet of plain water. "To moderation," he toasted. "May scarcity be our greatest teacher." They drank. The water tasted of survival. At midnight, as the palace drifted into uneasy slumber, Pharaoh wandered the corridors alone. He passed flickering torches and closed doors behind which silks rustled in dreams. He wondered if he could ever tame the horde of desires, if any sovereign could rule without being devoured by the appetites he inspired. He emerged onto the rooftop terrace, the Nile's dark ribbon pooling below. Here, free from the algebra of petitions, he let his mind roam. He thought of the obelisk he had yet to raise, the alliance he had nearly forged with Kush, the laughter that had rung earlier that night. And he realized that this relentless cycle of absurd demands and improbable alliances was the true tapestry of his reign. The wives were not mere burdens, but the beating heart of an empire, alive with chaos and creativity. They were the wild colors on his palette, the unpredictable notes in his anthem. With a final glance at the star-strewn sky, Pharaoh whispered, "Let tomorrow bring its madness. I shall rise and meet it with wit and will." Then he descended the spiral ramp, the soft echo of his sandals absorbed by the palace's cavernous silence. Ready, once again, to be both sovereign and ringmaster in the theater of 100 wives, the dawn crept tentatively over the palace, casting long shadows across tessellated floors still stained with last night's crumbs and spilled wine. Pharaoh awoke to an all-too-familiar chorus of muted sobs, indignant huffs, and the metallic clink of dozens of hidden poison vials being checked for freshness. He rubbed his temples, bracing himself for another 24 hours of domestic warfare, masquerading as courtly ritual. His first summons came before he'd even dressed. A breathless messenger delivered a scroll sealed with purple wax, the exclusive hue reserved for the most melodramatic edicts. Pharaoh cracked it open. The script was sprawling and overwrought. By decree of wife number 66, guardian of the royal menagerie and unofficial experimental taxidermist, it is hereby ordained that the palace zoo shall be expanded to include the fabled basilisk from Cyrene. Furthermore, she demands an immediate audience to argue the merits of embalming live specimens for future embalming practice. Pharaoh blinked. A basilisk? A creature whose mere gaze turned creatures to stone? And his wife wanted to study it alive? He pictured the palace courtyard, transformed into a petrified forest of stone-winged geese and frozen lapdogs. He moaned. Before he could summon Vizier Merenptah, wife 66 herself arrived. A tall woman draped in emerald robes embroidered with lifelike animal motifs. Her eyes glittered with barely contained excitement. "My king," she began, "imagine the prestige when foreign emissaries witnessed the soul-chilling beauty of a living basilisk. His Majesty's name will echo through every temple from Memphis to Thebes." Pharaoh offered a weak smile. "My dear, please consult the high priest of Heka first, lest we invite divine wrath upon the palace. And perhaps a mirror-shielded enclosure?" She waved him off. Details. I require only your blessing." He sighed. "Very well. I shall grant you an audience with the high priest, under the condition that no living creatures be turned to stone in the process." She curtsied, triumphant. Pharaoh scribbled a counter-decree. Basilisk acquisition authorized pending divine clarification. He hoped the priests would stall indefinitely. Barely had she departed than another summons arrived. This one from wife number 3, the charismatic Queen Mother, whose arrival always felt like a diplomatic offensive. She bent low before him, voice dripping with faux humility. My sovereign son, the heir Prince Amenhotep, feels neglected. He demands to co-host next week's Festival of the Sun in the Grand Plaza. He insists on a chariot ride at midday, under the full glare of Aten's rays. Pharaoh suppressed a groan. They'd already scheduled the festival around temple ceremonies, farmers' market, and a poetry slam. 14 separate events. Adding a chariot ride threatened to sunburn nobles and scorch the plaza's mosaic. He steeled himself. Prince Amenhotep shall share the festival's honors, yes. But the chariot procession will take place at dawn when the sun is gentle. Queen Mother bowed so deeply her nose nearly touched the floor. Your wisdom knows no bounds. Pharaoh noted to himself, ensure the chariot wheels were oiled before dawn, lest the heir arrive in splinters. No sooner had she swept away than wife number 80, head of the clandestine Order of the Silver Quill, materialized. Her official role was custodian of court secrets, but everyone knew she functioned as chief spymaster. She spoke in a hush, so hushed he strained to hear. My liege, she whispered, I have intercepted intelligence. Wife number 42 plans to smuggle foreign spices into the palace kitchens. She intends to undercut your appointed chief cook's recipes and win favor by dazzling the harem with exotic frostings and glazes. Pharaoh gasped at the audacity. Foreign spices meant higher taxes, diplomatic incident, and likely indigestion for the court. He cleared his throat. Arrest her? Confiscate the spices? Silver Quill shook her head. She is beloved among the younger wives. A public trial would foment unrest. I suggest offering her an official spice testing commission, enough to control the import and keep her content. Pharaoh nodded. Make it so, but ensure the jasmine and saffron blend is approved by the high priestess of Hathor, lest we anger the goddess of love with clashing aromas. Silver Quill bowed and melted away into the corridor's shadows. By mid-morning, Pharaoh's head throbbed like a war drum. He retreated to the throne room, where the day's first grand audience awaited, ambassadors from the sea peoples bearing salted fish and elaborate beadwork. Before they could speak, they were waylaid by wife number 17, the grande dame of decorative arts, who insisted on draping the envoy's platform in 50 yards of her latest dyed silk. The ambassadors, now swathed in fuchsia drapery, looked like flamboyant caterpillars. Their leader cleared his throat. Your Majesty, we appreciate the textiles. We came to discuss maritime trade. Pharaoh offered a trembling bow. Yes, trade. He signaled the vizier to steer the conversation. The vizier deftly steered talk to fish tariffs, shipping lanes, and, miraculously, ignored the silken chrysalis. The sea people smiled at last, probably relieved their clothes didn't require extra upkeep. After the audience, Pharaoh escaped to the palace baths, hoping steam and scented oils might soothe his nerves. But his peace was short-lived. Wife number 22 appeared at the bath doors, clad in sea-green robes and carrying a basket of rare seaweed. She announced she'd discovered an elixir of youth in fermented kelp, a discovery she planned to patent on behalf of the royal court. She demanded funding for a complete marine biology laboratory in the western quarters. Pharaoh slipped behind a curtain. A laboratory in the palace baths? She nodded vigorously. Think of the prestige when we host scholars from Punt to document this miraculous algae. Your name will ring through eternity. He stared at her. Does it smell fishy? She laughed. Only slightly. She patted the basket. But worth it, yes? Pharaoh sighed. On the condition that all experiments remain ocean-bound. I have no desire to smell of kelp at council meetings. She beamed and departed, leaving the scent of brine wafting through the steam. By afternoon, the palace courtyard had morphed into an open-air bazaar of petitions and performances. Wife number 40, mistress of music and unofficial conductor of drunken lutre, arranged a spontaneous lament on cedarwood lutes, her ballad extolling the pharaoh's virtues and lamenting the lack of honeyed wine. The musicians played off-key. The audience winced. Pharaoh approved a decree for wine rations, but insisted they be saved for formal banquets rather than impromptu concerts. Wife number 69, who'd once petitioned for a symposium on moonlight reflections, seized the opportunity. She announced an immediate conference on lunar studies, requiring each wife to submit a poem by sunset. Failure to comply would result in public recitation of critics' failures. Pharaoh shuddered at the thought of his favorite poet slandering him in rhyme. He banned the symposium until after the harvest festival, citing a shortage of wax tablets. Late afternoon brought the most serious threat: news of border raiders attacking a distant outpost. The general arrived, armor clanking, bearing reports of pillaged granaries and frightened farmers. Pharaoh's pulse quickened. This was the kind of crisis that demanded decisive action. But before he could mount his horse, he was intercepted by wife number 87, the champion of civic charity, who insisted on organizing a relief caravan of exotic gifts to comfort the border villagers. She'd already recruited volunteers and purchased supplies: silken blankets, date wine, and personally embroidered banners, reading from the heart of Egypt's harem. The general frowned. "Your Majesty, we need grain, soldiers, and fortifications, not silk." Pharaoh found his tongue. "Generous lady, please accompany our engineers to the frontier. Your blankets and banners will cheer spirits, but the soldiers will hold the line." She curtsied, serene. "As you command." Pharaoh turned to the general. "Prepare the grain wagons. I will personally inspect the relief efforts at dawn." The general saluted, eager for a tangible objective. When evening fell, Pharaoh convened the final council of the day in the private audience chamber, a small, dimly lit room where he sometimes found clarity. He faced a semicircle of wives who'd been elevated to special advisory roles: the spice commissioner, the textile curator, the animal curator, the literary custodian, and the newly minted marine alchemist. Each bore notes, petitions, and proposals. Pharaoh took a deep breath. "Ladies, our kingdom faces threats both foreign and domestic. We must streamline our priorities. Effective tomorrow, I propose we establish 2 commissions, one for state crisis management, overseeing borders, granaries, and security, and another for palace enrichment, overseeing festivals, arts, and curiosities." He paused, gauging their reactions. The spice commissioner applauded. The textile curator narrowed her eyes. The animal curator took vigorous notes. The literary custodian nodded approvingly. The marine alchemist looked hopeful, pen poised. Pharaoh pressed on. "Membership shall be limited to 5. I will chair crisis management. Wife 87 will co-chair. I will chair enrichment. Wife 97 will co-chair. Each commission may propose 3 initiatives per moon. Additional requests will be held until we review progress." Silence settled. Then, astonishingly, wife number 97, the festival laureate, spoke with calm authority. "Your Majesty's plan brings needed focus. I accept co-chair duties for enrichment." Others nodded in reluctant agreement. Pharaoh allowed himself a smile of relief. A framework, a structure. Perhaps he would survive this reign after all. But as he rose to dismiss the council, the doors burst open. Eunuchs entered bearing a gilded chest. They bowed. Pharaoh frowned. He'd not ordered treasures. One eunuch opened the chest. Inside lay hundreds of jeweled viper fang amulets. Wife number 99, the apothecary of toxins, materialized behind them, eyes alight. "These," she proclaimed, "are tokens of protection against malevolent curses. I distribute them freely to all wives, except those who refuse to fund my next project, an antidote workshop to neutralize any poison in the palace. Your life, my sovereign, depends on it." Pharaoh's mouth hung open. He sank into his throne. Commissions, he'd thought. He was almost master of his court's machinery. But one rogue alchemist threatened to undo every decree. He steadied himself. "Tokens are appreciated, but commissions must approve funding." He inclined his head toward wife 87 and 97. "They will review the antidote proposal tomorrow." Wife 99 bared a fang-toothed grin. "As you command, though my antidote may take precedence over minor edicts." Pharaoh exhaled, imagining viper fang amulets jangling in the corridors like sinister wind chimes. When all had departed, he sat alone under flickering torches, the eastern wing's windows glowing with lamplight. He reflected on the day's victories and near defeats, a commission born, a basilisk delayed, a chariot procession tamed, a spice syndicate pacified, and yet an antidote workshop looming. He rubbed his weary eyes. He rose and walked to the balcony. The city beyond was a web of lights and shadows, markets closing, temples closing, fishermen hauling nets along the Nile. Somewhere, border soldiers prepared for a dawn inspection. Somewhere, embalmers drafted plans for the basilisk's tomb. Somewhere, a dozen wives brewed midnight incense blends to keep the palace restless. Pharaoh whispered to the night breeze, "Tomorrow I shall wed reason to chaos. I shall steer this vessel through storms of ambition and absurdity." He paused, recalling his commission plan. "Yes, tomorrow we sail with charts in hand, even if the sea is venomous." He retreated into the palace's silent heart, sandals echoing on marble. He climbed the spiral ramp to his private chamber, where a single lotus incense burned, its sweet smoke curling like whispered promises of peace. He disrobed, placing his crown and regalia on a simple pedestal, symbols of power he could barely wield. Lying on his bed of reeds, he gazed at the painted ceiling, scenes of the sun god's journey, of Pharaoh's conquering chaos. He thought of his commissions, his decrees, his wary truce with the almighty harem. He felt the weight of centuries pressing on his chest, the legacy of rulers past, the expectations of rulers to come, the laughter and tears of 100 wives echoing in eternity. He closed his eyes and let exhaustion wash over him. In the hush, he heard distant honks, the soft scrape of styluses on papyrus, the muted roar of the Nile against its banks. In that moment between waking and dreaming, he felt a curious thrill, the thrill of a sovereign who'd learned that true mastery lay not in domination, but in negotiation with the wild, untamable forces at his court's core, his wives. And so, as sleep claimed him, Pharaoh prayed not for silence, but for continued absurdity, so long as he could rise each dawn and face the glorious, maddening pageant of his reign. For in that pageant lay the heartbeat of Egypt itself, a kingdom woven from every fantasy, every ambition, every folly of the heart. And as long as that heartbeat pulsed, he would endure, ringmaster of the greatest circus ever known, the Pharaoh's 100 wives. Imagine being so bad at family politics that your in-laws cheer while you get your head chopped off. Welcome to the life of King Louis XVI, the man who managed to lose not only his crown, but also his noggin, all under the watchful gaze of Europe's most awkward dinner guests, his wife's royal relatives. If you thought your in-laws were judgmental, try living in a gilded fishbowl, while the Holy Roman Emperor critiques your economic policies over foie gras. Louis XVI didn't just inherit the French throne. He inherited a flaming pile of debt, social unrest, and a population with more pitchforks than patience. His biggest problem? He was a nerd, a well-meaning, lot-collecting, introverted nerd. While the people demanded reform, bread, and someone to blame for their misery, Louis tinkered with clocks and tried to avoid confrontation like it was smallpox. Let's set the scene. France, late 18th century. A kingdom so opulent it had entire rooms just for wigs, and so broke it couldn't afford to keep its army fed. The monarchy was a glittering corpse, stuffed with outdated traditions and Versailles court etiquette so convoluted that you could spend 3 hours trying to get dressed, only to discover someone else had dibs on handing you your trousers. Louis ascended the throne in 1774 at the tender age of 20. His wife, Marie Antoinette, was the teenage daughter of Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, a woman who treated diplomacy like a chess match where all her pawns were genetically related. From the start, Louis was under scrutiny. His marriage was a political alliance, not a love story, and it didn't help that for 7 awkward years, the royal couple failed to produce an heir. Europe whispered, pamphlets cackled, and Louis tried to ignore the snickers about his royal performance issues. Now, Marie Antoinette's in-laws were the Habsburgs, a family so aggressively intermarried that their family tree resembled a Mobius strip. The Habsburgs saw France as a valuable piece in their continental power games, and they weren't thrilled that Louis seemed more interested in hunting and locksmithing than in running an empire. Empress Maria Theresa bombarded Marie with letters, basically saying, For the love of God, get pregnant and make France listen to you. Meanwhile, Louis tried to govern a nation where the rich paid no taxes, the poor paid all of them, and Enlightenment thinkers were publishing spicy essays about liberty and equality like it was intellectual porn. Louis, ever the cautious bureaucrat, waffled on reform. He convened finance ministers who proposed taxing the nobles, and then promptly fired them when those nobles protested. It was a royal seesaw of incompetence, and all of Europe was watching. As things spiraled, Louis did what any man drowning in debt and aristocratic rage might do. He called the Estates General, a kind of medieval group therapy session for France's three social classes. It hadn't met in 175 years. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. The commoners, known as the Third Estate, quickly realized they were outnumbered and outvoted by the clergy and nobility, who wore ridiculous hats and refused to budge on, well, anything. The Third Estate revolted, declared themselves the National Assembly, and kicked off the French Revolution with the political equivalent of, "We're not mad, just extremely disappointed." Louis responded with the decisiveness of a soufflé. He hovered, hesitated, and eventually brought troops to Paris, which of course triggered the storming of the Bastille. Heads rolled, metaphorically at first. Back in Austria, Marie Antoinette's family watched with growing horror. Empress Maria Theresa died in 1780, but her son, Emperor Joseph II, took the helm of concerned brother-in-law duties. Joseph wrote letters to Louis, offering advice and veiled threats. He even traveled to France to nudge Louis towards something resembling backbone. The result? Louis nodded, smiled, and did absolutely nothing. As bread rides turned to guillotine previews, the royal family was forcibly relocated from Versailles to the Tuileries Palace in Paris. It was less palace, more gilded prison. From there, Louis plotted escape with all the stealth of a marching band. In 1791, the royal family attempted to flee to Austria, disguised as commoners. Except they brought too much luggage, moved too slowly, and Louis insisted on stopping for dinner. Captured in Varennes, they were hauled back to Paris like an unwanted birthday present. This debacle humiliated Louis and infuriated the people. Meanwhile, Austria and Prussia began rattling sabers, threatening to invade France if harm came to Marie Antoinette. This had the subtlety of shouting, "Don't kill her," in a room full of guillotine enthusiasts. Louis, under house arrest, tried to play the role of constitutional monarch, but revolutionaries weren't buying it. His in-laws kept sending letters, increasingly exasperated. Imagine writing to your cousin-in-law, "Please stop being overthrown, it's bad for family dinners." The revolution grew teeth. The reign of terror loomed. Louis was put on trial by the National Convention, accused of treason, conspiracy, and being generally useless. He was found guilty. In January 1793, he was executed by guillotine, while his in-laws across Europe sighed, shrugged, and began plotting war against revolutionary France. So there you have it, Louis XVI, the king who lost his head, his throne, and his dignity, watched by royal relatives who probably wrote scathing diary entries about how he really should have taxed the nobles. Family dinners, indeed. Imagine being Emperor Francis II of Austria, sipping your morning coffee, when a courier bursts in to inform you that your sister, Marie Antoinette, has just been decapitated by angry Frenchmen with questionable dental hygiene. Talk about a rude awakening. Now you've got a personal vendetta and an empire to mobilize. Because when family dies horribly, you go full vengeance mode, even if it plunges the continent into 2 decades of bloodshed. Europe was now a royal trauma support group with swords. After Louis XVI and Marie got the chop, their Habsburg and Bourbon relatives weren't about to sit back and let commoners run around shouting about liberty, equality, and other dangerous ideas like voting. Monarchs across the continent looked at France like it had turned into a rabid raccoon, and everyone wanted to either cage it or put it down. Austria, led by Marie's nephew Francis II, declared that France must be punished. Not just punished, carpet-bombed with bayonets, aristocratic snobbery, and elaborate battle plans that relied on honor, formation, and a complete misunderstanding of revolutionary rage. Prussia joined the fun, forming the First Coalition, an alliance of monarchies determined to rescue France from itself, and more importantly, restore a Bourbon king. Because apparently, the best way to fix a beheaded monarchy was to stuff a cousin onto the throne and hope no one noticed. Enter Louis XVI's brothers, the exiled princes of France, now wandering Europe like royal couch surfers, begging for armies and attention. Louis XVIII, formerly known as the Count of Provence, declared himself king in exile. Never mind the fact that the French were guillotining anyone who even looked like they owned a powdered wig. Louis XVIII was ready to lead from the safety of a distant palace, preferably with good wine and no immediate threats of execution. Meanwhile, the French Revolution didn't stop for royal mourning, it accelerated. France, now a republic, declared war on pretty much everyone. The guillotine was in full swing. The reign of terror sliced through society like a drunken barber, and the Committee of Public Safety ran the country with all the subtlety of a cannon blast. Royalist émigrés, nobles who fled France, clogged the courts of Europe, telling horror stories of sans-culottes and revolutionary tribunals. These exiles, many of them related to Louis XVI by blood or extremely complicated family trees, lobbied for invasions, restorations, and royal vengeance. But instead of unity, the exiled royals bickered over titles, precedence, and who got to sit closest to the emperor's dinner table. The coalition wars began in earnest. Armies marched into France expecting a quick victory and perhaps a few souvenirs from Versailles. What they got instead was a revolutionary army high on nationalism, paranoia, and an alarming ability to improvise. France conscripted its citizens, forged a people's army, and sent monarchies fleeing. Heads rolled, not just in France, but across battlefields drenched in the blood of ideology. Back to the in-laws. Spain, ruled by the Bourbon family, yes, more cousins, was horrified by the regicide. King Charles IV, who had all the political savvy of a damp sponge, joined the coalition and declared war on revolutionary France. His wife, Queen Maria Louisa, reportedly said that Marie Antoinette's fate was the punishment of wickedness, a bold take considering her own son would later get deposed by Napoleon and live in exile. Karma's guillotine has many blades. Great Britain, ever the opportunistic island, joined the anti-French party, more out of fear of revolution than royal sympathy. George III, who was busy talking to trees due to bouts of madness, likely didn't grasp the full horror of Louis's execution, but his advisors understood that if France could guillotine a king, no monarchy was safe. Louis XVI's death became propaganda gold. Across Europe, monarchs commissioned dramatic paintings, tearful elegies, and anti-republican sermons. Louis was transformed from an indecisive ruler into a martyr of divine right, a holy figure whose blood cried out for revenge. His in-laws plastered churches with portraits of the martyred king, ignoring the fact that most of them had mocked him as a weakling just a few years earlier. Let's not forget Russia, where Empress Catherine the Great, one of history's sassiest autocrats, responded to Louis's execution by banning French books, expelling French citizens, and declaring the revolution an abomination. Catherine had zero patience for peasants with political opinions, and the sight of France imploding sent her into imperial overdrive. As Europe waged war, France executed more royals, including Louis XVI's sister, Madame Elisabeth. The surviving royal children, Louis Charles and Marie Thérèse, were imprisoned. Louis Charles, dubbed Louis XVII by royalists, wasted away in prison under horrific conditions, dying at age 10. His in-laws, scattered across Europe, demanded his release but achieved nothing. His death became another martyrdom for monarchists, who now had two royal corpses to rally around. Marie Thérèse, the only surviving child of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, endured captivity and trauma. When finally released in a prisoner exchange in 1795, she became a political pawn, paraded through Europe as the orphan of the temple. Her life was a tragic parade of exiled courts, distant relatives with political agendas, and the haunting legacy of her beheaded parents. The war dragged on, coalition after coalition forming and collapsing. Monarchs realized that defeating France was less like chess and more like trying to swat a hornet's nest with a spoon. France, battered but defiant, produced a new hero, Napoleon Bonaparte, a Corsican artillery officer with a god complex and a knack for battlefield brilliance. Napoleon rose through the chaos, promising order, glory, and ironically, a crown. By 1804, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French, inverting the old order. Louis XVI's in-laws watched in horror as a low-born general seized the throne once occupied by their kin. Even worse, Napoleon married Marie-Louise of Austria, Francis II's daughter, Marie Antoinette's niece. The Habsburgs went from mourning Marie to handing Napoleon a royal bride, hoping to tame the revolutionary beast with marriage. Spoiler, it didn't work. The royal families of Europe, once united by blood, found themselves entangled in hypocrisy, self-interest, and shifting alliances. Some in-laws wanted revenge, others wanted peace. Many just wanted to survive the maelstrom. And through it all, the specter of Louis XVI's execution haunted them, a reminder that crowns are heavy, heads are fragile, and revolutions don't send RSVP cards. Stay tuned for the next chapter, when Napoleon goes from revolutionary darling to emperor nightmare, and the ghost of Louis XV watches as Europe burns in the name of legacy, vengeance, and very bad decision-making. The crowned heads of Europe were now in full panic mode. The French Revolution had murdered a king, guillotined a queen, and tossed centuries of royal bloodline prestige into the Seine like last season's fashion. But wait, it gets worse. Enter Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who went from revolutionary artillery officer to emperor of the French in what felt like 3 costume changes and a very aggressive PR campaign. To Louis XV's in-laws, this wasn't just horrifying, it was personal betrayal. They had spent years trying to put another Bourbon on the throne. Instead, they got Napoleon, a man with 0 royal blood, a chip on his shoulder the size of Corsica, and a disturbing talent for winning battles against entire coalitions of nobles who had never personally fought anything more dangerous than gout. Let's talk about the Bourbon exiles. After Louis and Marie Antoinette met Madame Guillotine, their surviving relatives scattered like aristocratic confetti. Louis XVIII, formerly Count of Provence, styled himself King of France, while living in various European cities, each one slightly less glamorous than the last. He was the kind of man who believed deeply in divine right, but less so in exercise or charisma. Louis XVIII spent years issuing royal decrees from exile, paper proclamations that the French people used to light their revolutionary cigars. His younger brother, the Comte d'Artois, was equally ambitious and arguably even more out of touch. Together, they hosted royal courts in exile, where nobles gossiped, planned counter-revolutions, and waited for someone else to do the actual fighting. Meanwhile, Marie Antoinette's family, the Habsburgs, were embroiled in their own imperial meltdown. Emperor Francis II, her nephew, declared war after her death, joining the Second and Third coalitions against France. His armies lost repeatedly, thanks in part to Napoleon's genius and in part to the Habsburgs' insistence on using battle strategies that hadn't changed since the time of knights and plague doctors. Napoleon humiliated Austria at Austerlitz in 1805, a battle so lopsided that it forced Francis II to dissolve the Holy Roman Empire. Yes, that Holy Roman Empire, the 1,000-year-old institution that was neither holy, Roman, nor an empire. One Frenchman with a funny hat had destroyed what centuries of wars, plagues, and internal squabbling could not. And then, in a move so ironic it nearly caused Europe to combust, Napoleon married Marie Louise, the daughter of Emperor Francis II, Marie Antoinette's niece. The Habsburgs, who had once condemned the revolution and wept over Marie's death, now welcomed Napoleon into the family with all the warmth of a snake wedding a mouse. It was diplomacy via shotgun marriage. Marie Louise, a teenager, wasn't thrilled to marry Napoleon, but she understood her role: produce an heir, pretend to like short men with ego issues, and keep Austria from being entirely conquered. Napoleon, for his part, reveled in the symbolism. He had risen from obscurity to marry into the same dynasty that had once scorned his people. Take that, in-laws. Back in Bourbon exile land, Louis XVIII seethed. Napoleon not only ruled France, but now had a legitimate Habsburg wife, and soon, a son. The dream of restoring the old monarchy seemed dead. European courts still hosted Louis and his hangers-on, but behind polite smiles they were betting on Bonaparte. The French monarchy was a relic. Napoleon was the future, or so it seemed. For years, Europe waged war, bled, and lost. Napoleon carved out an empire that stretched from Spain to Russia, crowning relatives and sycophants as kings. Louis XVI's in-laws watched helplessly as their ancestral lands fell under the control of a man they viewed as an upstart tyrant. The world turned upside down, and Versailles was now a museum. But then came 1812, Napoleon's ill-fated invasion of Russia. the military equivalent of poking a bear with a baguette. His grand army froze, starved, and died by the tens of thousands. Europe smelled blood. The Sixth Coalition formed, including Austria, Prussia, Britain, and Russia. Suddenly, the in-laws had hope. Napoleon's defeats piled up. In 1814, Paris fell, and Napoleon abdicated. Louis XVIII returned to France, riding in on the coattails of foreign armies like an awkward uncle invited back to a party he helped ruin. The Restoration began. The monarchy was back, older, fatter, and clinging to the past like it was fine china. Louis XVIII tried to rule, but France had changed. The revolution and empire had transformed society. People remembered liberty, not Bourbon decrees. Louis reinstated noble privileges, ignored the middle class, and alienated pretty much everyone except fellow monarchs. Even the royalists found him dull. Then, in 1815, Napoleon escaped exile on Elba and returned to France. The army defected to him almost instantly, and Louis XVIII fled, again. Napoleon's 100 days' reign shook Europe one last time. The Battle of Waterloo crushed Napoleon, and Louis XVIII returned again, this time for good. Louis XVI's in-laws had finally restored the monarchy, but it was hollow. France simmered with unrest. The guillotine was silent, but the memories remained. Bourbon rule limped on until 1830, when another revolution sent Charles de Trevas, Louis XVI's younger brother, into exile. The monarchy had been restored, then rejected. So what's the legacy of Louis XVI and his in-laws? A royal disaster. A continent plunged into war, revolution, and upheaval. The old order shattered, heads rolled, thrones toppled, and the very idea of divine right became a historical punchline. The in-laws tried to fight history and lost. Their world died with Louis's head in a basket, and so Europe plunged headfirst into a royal revenge tour, a continent-wide "we told you so" that turned the French Revolution into a multi-decade bloodbath. Louis XVI's execution hadn't just ended a reign. It had set off the monarchic equivalent of a bar fight, where everyone was related and nobody could remember who threw the first punch. Austria, Prussia, Britain, and a rotating cast of disgruntled monarchies formed coalitions, each declaring war on revolutionary France. Their goal? Restore the old order, save their own crowns, and maybe, just maybe, avenge their dear decapitated cousin-in-law. The French responded by exporting revolution with all the subtlety of cannon fire. Heads rolled, thrones trembled, and Europe learned that ideas like liberty, inequality, were contagious and deadly. The Bourbon family, meanwhile, was scattered like aristocratic confetti. Louis XVIII, Louis XVI's pudgy and determined brother, declared himself king from exile, first in Germany, then Italy, then England. He spent his time issuing proclamations, attending awkward royal banquets, and praying that someone would put him back on a throne. His letters to other monarchs read like a mix of pity party invitations and desperate pleas for military support. Meanwhile, the French Revolution morphed into something even more unpredictable. After guillotining Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, the revolutionaries turned on each other. Enter Robespierre and the Reign of Terror, a time when being insufficiently enthusiastic about the revolution could get you a date with Madame Guillotine. The streets of Paris flowed with noble blood, and Louis XVI's extended family watched in horror from across the borders. Marie Antoinette's nephew, Emperor Francis II, now ruled Austria, and he had inherited the royal grudge. He declared war on France, lost repeatedly, and finally realized that sending troops wasn't enough. France needed internal enemies, royalists who could spark a counter-revolution. So, European monarchs funded French émigrés, those noble refugees who had fled and now haunted European courts like sad ghosts of Whigs past. Then came Napoleon Bonaparte, a name that sent chills down the spine of every Habsburg, Bourbon, and Hohenzollern. He rose from artillery officer to ruler of France faster than you can say coup d'état. In 1799, he seized power, declared himself first consul, and later crowned himself emperor. Yes, crowned himself, because letting the Pope do it was apparently too humble. Louis XVI's in-laws were flabbergasted. Not only had France rejected the Bourbon monarchy, it had embraced a Corsican upstart with a knack for battlefield brilliance and self-promotion. Napoleon steamrolled Europe, humiliating Austria at Austerlitz in 1805, dissolving the Holy Roman Empire and forcing Francis II to rebrand himself as Emperor of Austria, a downgrade in both title and ego. In the most absurd twist of all, Napoleon married Marie-Louise, daughter of Francis II and niece of Marie Antoinette. Yes, the man who indirectly caused Marie's death married her blood relative. The Habsburgs, seeing the writing on the cannonball, agreed to the match, hoping to tame the beast from within. Marie-Louise, barely 18, was shipped off to Paris to become empress and bear Napoleon an heir. Her in-laws sent her with tears, prayers, and a lifetime supply of diplomatic tension. Louis XVIII, meanwhile, sulked in England, issuing increasingly irrelevant manifestos. Napoleon mocked him as the king of nothing, while the Bourbon supporters tried to ignite royalist uprisings, most of which fizzled like soggy fireworks. The French people had grown used to life without Bourbon rule, and the sight of Napoleon winning wars made monarchy look outdated. But Napoleon, like all overachievers, overreached. In 1812, he invaded Russia, and the result was a military catastrophe so massive it inspired Tchaikovsky to write explosive music about it. Napoleon's army froze, starved, and died in droves. Europe, sensing opportunity, ganged up once more. The Sixth Coalition battered Napoleon until, in 1814, Paris fell, and Napoleon was exiled to Elba. Q. Louis XVIII's return to France, a royal comeback tour decades in the making. He waddled into Paris, restored the monarchy, and immediately reminded everyone why they had guillotined his brother in the first place. The restoration was awkward, filled with nobles trying to reclaim lost privileges and peasants glaring suspiciously at powdered wigs. And then, like a historical prank, Napoleon escaped Elba. He landed in France, gathered an army, and marched on Paris. Louis XVIII fled again, proving that running away was a Bourbon family tradition. Napoleon ruled for 100 days, culminating in his defeat at Waterloo in 1815. He was exiled for good, and Louis XVIII returned, again. The monarchy limped on, but it was never the same. The Revolution and Napoleon had changed France forever. Louis XVI's in-laws had won, but their victory felt hollow. The world had moved on. Royalty wasn't sacred anymore. It was nostalgic, fragile, and increasingly irrelevant. So what do we make of King Louis XVI and his meddling in-laws? A cautionary tale of royal incompetence, family drama on a continental scale, and the high price of failing to read the room or the revolution. They tried to preserve the old world, only to find themselves swept away by a new one, sharp-edged and unforgiving. In the end, Louis lost his head, his throne, and his legacy. His in-laws watched it all, powerless, plotting, and ultimately realizing that history waits for no crown. And the next time you feel awkward at a family dinner, just remember, it could be worse. Your relatives could be monarchs plotting your downfall while sipping imported wine. Imagine being so formidable that entire empires trembled at your side-eye, and your ex-lovers prayed not for your affection, but for survival. Welcome to the world of Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia, conqueror of lands, breaker of men, and possibly the only monarch in history whose reputation is both legendary and a historical soap opera. If you think your dating life is complicated, try being Catherine, whose romantic partners either ended up exiled, dead, or with really awkward memoirs. This is not just a story of power, it's a cautionary tale about why flirting with the Empress was hazardous to your health. Catherine the Great didn't start life as a Russian empress. She was born Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, a minor German princess with a long name, modest means, and ambitions the size of Siberia. In 1744, she was shipped off to Russia to marry the future Tsar, Peter III, a man who made socially awkward look like a career choice. Peter loved playing with toy soldiers and worshipped Frederick the Great of Prussia, which is a bit of a problem when you're supposed to rule Russia. Sophie, who was smart enough to realize that her future husband was about as politically useful as a paper umbrella in a blizzard, rebranded herself. She converted to Orthodoxy, became Ekaterina Alexeyevna, and mastered Russian language and customs so thoroughly that she made the native courtiers look like clueless tourists. She also started reading, a lot. Philosophy, politics, Enlightenment thinkers. Catherine didn't just want to wear a crown, she wanted to know how to use it. Meanwhile, Peter continued his journey to becoming Russia's most disappointing husband. He insulted the Russian military, paraded around in Prussian uniforms, and reportedly refused to consummate the marriage for years. While Catherine plotted how to stay relevant in a palace that barely tolerated her, Peter threw tantrums and held mock battles with his toy soldiers. Russia was not impressed. In 1762, Empress Elizabeth died, and Peter became Tsar. His reign lasted 6 months, which was about 5.5 months longer than anyone enjoyed it. Peter managed to alienate the church, the army, and the nobility in record time. Catherine saw her moment. With a mix of political savvy and help from the military, and some very convenient pillow talk with powerful officers, she staged a coup. Peter was arrested, and shortly after, he died under mysterious circumstances. Officially, it was natural causes. Unofficially, let's just say that being an ex-husband of Catherine the Great was statistically unwise. Catherine was now Empress of Russia, and she wasted no time showing the world she meant business. She embarked on a reign of expansion, reform, and enlightenment-inspired chaos. Her court was a mix of philosophers, diplomats, and lovers, often the same people. Voltaire and Diderot praised her. She corresponded with the intellectual elite of Europe, dazzling them with her wit and appearing to rule with reason. Meanwhile, back in Russia, she was solidifying autocracy with the finesse of a political ninja. Her romantic life was equally legendary. Catherine didn't just choose lovers, she curated them. Handsome guardsmen, ambitious politicians, artists. If you were charming, useful, or vaguely entertaining, you might find yourself in the Empress's bedchamber. But woe to the man who bored her, crossed her, or forgot who was in charge. Catherine's lovers were often gifted estates, titles, and then quietly dismissed with a pension and a warning not to cause trouble. Some listened, others ended up retired in ways that made permanent retirement look appealing. Perhaps her most famous lover was Grigory Potemkin, a soldier, statesman, and possibly the only man Catherine truly loved. Their relationship was a swirling mix of passion, politics, and power. Potemkin was brilliant, temperamental, and just as ambitious as Catherine. Together, they expanded Russian territory, reformed the army, and scandalized European courts. Some say they secretly married. Others say they argued like thunderclouds but never stopped caring. Either way, Potemkin was the rare man who met Catherine as an equal and survived. While Europe gossiped about her boudoir, Catherine expanded Russia like it was a competitive sport. She annexed Crimea, crushed uprisings, and waged wars against the Ottoman Empire and Poland. She divided Poland with Austria and Prussia, slicing up the map like a geopolitical pie. Catherine didn't just play the Game of Thrones. She rewrote the rules, bought the board, and exiled the other players. Back home, she reformed administration, education, and the legal code. Or at least she tried. Enlightenment ideals look great on paper, but Russian reality was a bit more medieval. Serfdom, poverty, and corruption were deeply entrenched. Catherine issued grand proclamations and then spent years watching them get ignored, diluted, or turned into excuses for more bureaucracy. Still, she kept up appearances, hosting lavish court events while secretly wondering if anyone had actually read her decrees. And through it all, the parade of men continued. Some lovers thought they could manipulate Catherine. Some believed they could rule beside her. All of them discovered that Catherine was Russia's ruler first, last, and always. Many left her presence richer, but none left unscathed. If you wanted to survive Catherine the Great, you had to accept that you were a supporting character in her drama, not the star. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where rebellions rise, palaces glitter, and Catherine faces her greatest threat yet, a peasant who thought he was her dead husband, back from the grave and ready to reclaim the throne. Spoiler, he wasn't. Imagine marrying into Russian royalty, staging a coup against your husband, and then becoming so powerful that even your enemies write you love letters. Welcome to the chaotic, icy throne of Catherine the Great, the empress who turned seduction into statecraft and left a trail of ex-lovers who probably wished they'd stuck to farming. If you thought workplace romances were messy, try being a 1700s monarch with a penchant for power plays and palace intrigue. Catherine the Great was born as Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, a minor German princess with big ambitions and even bigger problems. Her mother was overbearing, her father irrelevant, and her future uncertain. But then fate tossed her a royal bone. She was betrothed to Peter, the heir to the Russian throne. There was just one tiny snag. Peter was not great. In fact, he was barely functional. Peter was obsessed with Prussia, toy soldiers, and making everyone uncomfortable, while Sophie rebranded herself as Catherine, converted to Orthodoxy, and threw herself into Russian culture with the enthusiasm of someone gunning for a promotion. Peter seemed more interested in playing war games and alienating everyone at court. Their marriage was about as romantic as a tax audit. Catherine quickly realized that if she wanted to survive, let alone thrive, she'd need allies, leverage, and a backup plan. Enter the lovers. Catherine wasn't just collecting men for fun, though, let's be honest, she probably enjoyed it. Each affair was a calculated move, a step up the political ladder, and a safeguard against Peter's erratic behavior. Her first major lover, Sergei Saltykov, was charming, well-connected, and possibly the real father of Catherine's son, Paul. Historians argue over the paternity like it's a royal episode of Maury, but Catherine didn't care. She was busy building influence, one affair at a time. When Peter finally ascended the throne in 1762, Russia collectively sighed in despair. His reign lasted 6 months, and during that time he managed to alienate the military, offend the Orthodox Church, and insult basically everyone. Catherine, ever the opportunist, staged a coup with the help of her latest lover, Grigory Orlov, and his well-armed brothers. Peter was arrested, forced to abdicate, and conveniently died shortly after, from hemorrhoidal colic, according to official reports, but probably from oops, we murdered him. Now Empress of all the Russias, Catherine set about ruling a country that was vast, cold, and full of nobles who thought women shouldn't be in charge. She responded by outworking, outsmarting, and outmaneuvering them all. She corresponded with Enlightenment philosophers, implemented legal reforms, and expanded the empire like she was playing Risk on expert mode. Meanwhile, she kept her lover collection updated, trading out aging boyfriends for newer models with the efficiency of a royal HR department. Grigory Potemkin was the exception. More than just a lover, he was Catherine's political partner, military genius, and the kind of man who could invade Crimea before breakfast. Their relationship was intense, strategic, and possibly involved a secret marriage. Potemkin understood Catherine in a way few others did. She wanted glory, stability, and a Russia that rivaled the great empires of Europe. Together, they built cities, crushed rebellions, and created the infamous Potemkin villages. Fake towns meant to impress foreign dignitaries, because sometimes propaganda is just good real estate with a fresh coat of paint. But not all of Catherine's lovers were success stories. Some, like Alexander Vasilchikov, found themselves dumped unceremoniously with a pension and a palace. Catherine was generous to her exes, as long as they didn't annoy her. When Stanisław Poniatowski, her former flame, became king of Poland, thanks to her meddling, he quickly realized being Catherine's puppet wasn't as fun as their earlier trysts. She used him, used Poland, and then carved up his kingdom in the partitions that made European cartographers cry. Catherine ruled for over 3 decades, balancing reform with autocracy, war with diplomacy, and passion with pragmatism. She survived palace intrigue, plague, uprisings, and the ever-present judgment of European monarchs who couldn't decide whether to fear her or flirt with her. She expanded Russian territory by hundreds of thousands of square miles, turned St. Petersburg into a cultural powerhouse, and left behind a legacy so large that later rulers could only hope to imitate her. Of course, being a powerful woman in history means the rumors never stop. After her death, detractors spread salacious gossip, including the infamous horse rumor, a lie so absurd it says more about the people who invented it than about Catherine herself. In truth, her biggest crime was being a woman who wielded power like a man, and often better. So here's to Catherine the Great, the empress who took no nonsense, broke hearts like twigs, and ruled an empire with the ruthlessness of a seasoned chess master. Stay tuned for part 3, where revolts, betrayals, and one very messy royal succession keep the drama going strong. Catherine the Great was many things: empress, reformer, art collector, and the unofficial patron saint of politically inconvenient romance. After establishing her rule with a coup and a conveniently dead husband, she now faced the Herculean task of ruling an empire that stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea, and managing a queue of ambitious men who believed that seduction might beat you, their shortcut to power. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Let's start with Grigory Potemkin, because while Catherine had many lovers, Potemkin was the Zeus to their minor deities. Their relationship was a whirlwind of strategy, affection, and just enough mutual respect to avoid public disaster. While Catherine handled the domestic mess, Potemkin marched off to expand the empire, most notably by annexing Crimea, which earned him accolades and enough medals to sink a small ship. Their bond was so tight that even after their romantic spark dimmed, Potemkin remained her most trusted advisor and warlord. Catherine, never one to let emotions cloud her empire building, promoted him, showered him with titles, and even let him handpick her future lovers like a royal matchmaker. Speaking of lovers, enter the favorites era, where Catherine curated her love life like a high-stakes art gallery. Men like Alexander Lanskoy and Ivan Rimsky-Korsakov enjoyed brief reigns in her bedroom, and occasionally minor roles in politics. These young paramours were often charming, usually decorative, and always temporary. Catherine treated her exes with the same policy she applied to disloyal nobles: generous pensions and a quiet exit. If they behaved, they retired wealthy. If not, they discovered that exile in Siberia comes with an impressive view of absolutely nothing. While her love life provided gossip fodder for every European court, Catherine was busy implementing reforms that aimed to drag Russia out of medieval sludge and into Enlightenment modernity. She attempted to codify laws, sponsor education, and bring a semblance of healthcare to her sprawling realm. But progress was like trying to ice skate uphill. Russia's feudal aristocracy resisted every change like stubborn barnacles on the hull of state. Then came the Pugachev Rebellion, an uprising so chaotic it could only be led by a man claiming to be her dead husband. Yes, Yemelyan Pugachev, a disgruntled Cossack with delusions of grandeur, gathered a peasant army and declared that he was actually Peter III, back from the grave and ready to reclaim his throne. Catherine, understandably alarmed, crushed the rebellion with ruthless efficiency and had Pugachev publicly executed. The message was clear: pretend to be her dead husband and you'll end up extra dead. The revolt revealed the fragile foundations of Catherine's empire. Serfdom, the institution binding millions of peasants to the land like medieval glue, was a time bomb she never managed to defuse. While she entertained Enlightenment ideals in her letters to Voltaire and Diderot, Catherine knew that freeing the serfs would mean alienating the very nobles who kept her on the throne. So she compromised, by doing almost nothing. Catherine's foreign policy, however, was less cautious and more land-grab with style. She joined with Austria and Prussia in the partitions of Poland, slicing up the once proud kingdom like it was a birthday cake nobody wanted to share. Her former lover turned Polish king, Stanisław Poniatowski, found himself betrayed and dethroned, likely wondering if dating an empress was really worth the geopolitical fallout. For Catherine, Poland was less about conquest and more about showing Europe she could redraw maps just as efficiently as any king. Despite constant warfare, internal strife, and the occasional lover-induced scandal, Catherine's court thrived as a center of art, architecture, and intellectual debate. She amassed a staggering collection of artwork, founded the Hermitage Museum, and corresponded with the Enlightenment's greatest minds. Her passion for culture was matched only by her tolerance for sycophants, who knew that flattery was the quickest way to gain influence, or at least a decent palace. And yet, behind the opulent facade, Catherine remained a ruler in a gilded cage. Her legitimacy was always precarious. She wasn't Russian by birth, had seized the throne in a coup, and ruled a society suspicious of powerful women. Every decision, every reform, every lover had to be weighed against the risk of rebellion or assassination. Her court was a minefield of intrigue, with nobles who smiled during dinner and plotted treason over dessert. Toward the end of her reign, Catherine's focus shifted to securing her legacy. Her son Paul, the long-suffering and possibly illegitimate heir, was more a liability than a successor. She distrusted him, disliked his policies, and reportedly considered bypassing him altogether in favor of her grandson, Alexander. Catherine feared that Paul would undo everything she'd built, and history proved her right, but not before she died of a stroke in 1796, leaving the throne to a man she could barely tolerate. Her death unleashed a flood of rumors, the most infamous being that she died in an undignified and scandalous way involving a horse. In reality, she collapsed in her private chambers and died soon after, but truth rarely competes with gossip. The horse tale, ridiculous and grotesque, reflected the misogyny of her time. a smear campaign aimed at discrediting a woman who had dared to rule like a man and had done it better than most. Catherine's legacy is complicated, like all rulers who straddle the line between despot and visionary. She expanded Russia's borders, modernized its institutions, and left a cultural imprint that outlived her lovers and enemies alike. But she also entrenched autocracy, upheld serfdom, and wielded power with a cold, calculated precision that made her beloved and feared in equal measure. So here's to Catherine the Great, empress, lover, conqueror, and survivor. She played the Game of Thrones and won, at least until death forced her to pass the crown to the son she wished she could unadopt. Stay tuned for part 4, where Catherine's ghost haunts Russian history, and her successors struggle to live up to the legacy of a woman who turned passion into power. Catherine the Great's shadow loomed large over Russia long after her death, like an empress who refused to exit stage left. Her successors, especially her least favorite child, Paul I, found themselves trapped under the weight of her legacy, trying and failing to escape the ghost of the woman who'd ruled like a force of nature. Paul, poor Paul, finally got his chance to rule after Catherine's timely stroke. He ascended the throne determined to un-Catherine everything. Where she had been cosmopolitan, he was provincial. Where she had been politically nimble, he was rigid as a frozen samovar. And where she had embraced Enlightenment ideals, with a monarchist's filter, Paul decided that the best way to govern was by unleashing a torrent of decrees, laws, and fashion mandates. Yes, fashion mandates. Paul declared that no one could wear round hats because they reminded him of revolutionary France. This was governance by grudge. His mother's disdain hung over him like a fog, and Paul took to rewriting history, ordering statues of Catherine removed, her portraits taken down, and her reforms rolled back. But Paul's reign of petty vengeance was short-lived, only 5 years. His own nobles, tired of his tantrums and threats, staged a palace coup, assassinated him in his bedroom, and installed his son Alexander I on the throne. It turns out, trying to undo your mother's empire with weird hats and autocratic rants is not a sustainable leadership model. Alexander III inherited not only the empire, but the burden of his grandmother's greatness. He fancied himself a philosopher king, someone who could marry Catherine's expansive vision with the moral clarity of a liberal, without the pesky inconvenience of actually giving people rights. During his reign, Russia became entangled in the Napoleonic Wars, with Alexander shifting from ally to sworn enemy of Napoleon faster than a courtier changing allegiances. The 1812 French invasion of Russia was the ultimate test, and Alexander answered it by doing what Catherine would have never dared. He let Moscow burn. The scorched earth strategy worked. Napoleon's grand army froze and starved, and Alexander emerged a hero of Europe. He marched triumphantly into Paris in 1814, a Russian Tsar hailed as the savior of monarchs. Somewhere, Catherine's ghost must have smirked approvingly. Her grandson had finally done something worthy of her dynasty. Yet Alexander's later years were marked by increasing mysticism and paranoia, haunted by conspiracies and the fear of assassination. He began withdrawing from public life, leaving governance to ministers and contemplating whether to abdicate. Rumors swirled that he faked his death in 1825 and lived incognito as a hermit named Fyodor Kuzmich, because if you can't rule better than your grandmother, maybe disappear and let people imagine you did. Fast forward to Nicholas I, Alexander's brother and successor, who approached autocracy like a man trying to out-tsar every tsar before him. His reign was heavy on censorship, secret police, and iron-fisted control. Catherine's reforms, watered down or reversed, her cultural openness, closed with a loud bureaucratic thud. Nicholas believed Russia needed a strong hand, preferably one wearing a gauntlet, and his crackdown on dissent ensured that Catherine's vision of Enlightenment Russia remained a dream deferred. Catherine's long-dead influence resurfaced during the reign of Alexander II, the Tsar liberator, who dared to do what even she had feared, emancipate the serfs. In 1861, millions of Russian peasants were freed, though with conditions so convoluted they might as well have remained serfs with better paperwork. Catherine, from beyond the grave, could probably relate to the political tightrope Alexander walked, and might have offered him advice, possibly something snarky about managing nobles with bribes instead of bayonets. Her cultural legacy, however, fared better than her political one. The Hermitage Museum, her prized creation, grew into one of the world's greatest art collections. Her letters, writings, and even her salacious reputation kept her name alive in European gossip, long after her empire was parceled out by successors with less flair and far less charisma. Catherine's mythos only grew in the 20th century, as revolutions, world wars, and the rise of the Soviet Union erased the imperial world she had ruled. The Bolsheviks, of course, had no love for autocrats, and Catherine was painted as a symbol of decadent tyranny, albeit one with a suspiciously large number of admirers among Soviet historians who couldn't quite dismiss her effectiveness. Even Stalin, the ultimate authoritarian, occasionally referenced Catherine as an example of strong leadership, though it's unclear if he admired her for her reforms, her military campaigns, or simply her ability to survive palace intrigue without resorting to purges that filled mass graves. Either way, she remained a fixture in Russian historical consciousness, alternately vilified and venerated depending on who held power. In the modern era, Catherine's story became a favorite for biographers, dramatists, and scandal-hungry pop culture. Films, novels, and TV shows portrayed her as everything from a feminist icon to a ruthless tyrant. The infamous horse rumor, laughably false yet stubbornly persistent, continued to dominate headlines centuries after her death, a testament to how history remembers powerful women, not with reverence, but with gossip. Yet through it all, Catherine the Great endures as one of history's most complex rulers. She was not born to rule, not meant to be empress, and yet she forged a reign that reshaped a continent. Her love affairs, often exaggerated or weaponized by her enemies, were footnotes to a life defined by political genius, cultural patronage, and imperial ambition. She lived in a world that demanded she be either a saint or a monster, and she was neither. Catherine was simply a survivor, one who learned that in the brutal theater of monarchy, the curtain only closes when you're dead, and even then, the audience won't stop talking. So here ends the saga of Catherine the Great and the men who regretted meeting her. Whether lover, rival, or heir, they all discovered that crossing Catherine was a lesson in power, survival, and the fine art of being outmaneuvered by a woman who played the long game, and almost always won.